Ned Stark stood on the cold stone floor of the Red Keep's throne room, the clamor of armored men echoing from the walls. His wrists were bound before him, but he held his head high. The gold cloaks who lined the hall exchanged furtive, uncertain glances as if they, too, doubted the justice about to be carried out by a petulant boy-king. King Joffrey lounged upon the iron throne, an ill-fitted crown on his flaxen hair. Sweat shone on his brow in the torchlight. Cersei Lannister stood off to one side, lips pressed together in a thin line, serpentine and watchful. Her father, Lord Tywin, was not present. He preferred to wage war on battlefields and in council chambers, far from this sham display of mercy or judgment. Ned could smell incense burning somewhere behind him, mingling with the stench of old blood and dust. He thought of his daughters Sansa, wide-eyed with fear, and Arya, missing but hopefully alive in the city somewhere. Joffrey had demanded an audience with all, promising leniency if the Lord of Winterfell confessed to treason. And so Ned had swallowed his pride. He had confessed, pinned between the life of his children and the honor he so cherished. Now the crowd gathered. The hush that spread through the throne room felt ominous, tightening around Ned's chest. He could barely hear his own breathing above the thunderous pound of his heart. He remembered the words of the man he used to be, stiff-necked, unyielding in matters of principle. Yet fatherhood had tempered him, made him pliable for the sake of protecting his own. A dire wolf, he had told himself, could shield its pups even if the world called that dire wolf a traitor. The moment dragged on before Joffrey stood and lifted a hand. Even from where Ned knelt, he could see the boy's eyes dancing with a cruelty that belied his age. Words tumbled from those cruel lips about justice and the crown, about traitors and usurpers. And then the king made his pronouncement. "Bring me his head," Joffrey said, with a petulant snap of his jaw, ignoring Cersei's frantic tug on his sleeve. A hush fell so absolute that it felt like a vacuum. Ned, heart lodged in his throat, thought he caught a fleeting glimpse of Sansa's stricken face behind the line of guards. Then chaos erupted, Cersei shouting, the gold cloaks advancing, men fumbling with their swords. Ned closed his eyes, bracing for the star-bright flash of Valyrian steel, waiting for the blow. He heard a scraping of metal as the king's justice lifted his sword. In that final fraction of a moment, he prayed for his family. Then a sudden, piercing cry rang out, a voice booming from the side of the dais. "Stop!" The word thundered across the throne room. It was not Cersei who spoke, but the voice of Grand Maester Pycelle. Never had Ned thought the quavering old man capable of such volume or urgency. Pycelle stood, bent and ancient, but his voice resounded with surprising force. His hand trembled as it clutched a rolled parchment bearing the royal seal of King Robert Baratheon. "You will not do this, not in the name of the king," Pycelle cried, though tears gathered in the corners of his eyes and his jowls quivered with fear. King Robert left instructions. He turned to stare at Joffrey, a watery fire in his gaze. "This is not how justice is meted out in the Seven Kingdoms. I beg mercy, your grace." For a single heartbeat, the entire hall stood paralyzed. Ned could sense the tension in the air. Joffrey looked perplexed, eyes flicking to his mother for support. Cersei, seizing the moment, spoke swiftly, her voice sharp. "Yes, my son, we must consider Lord Eddard's confession. He has named himself traitor, but the realm does not need more bloodshed. The wars rage. We must be wise." Joffrey scowled but found his mother's eyes. He swallowed as if uncertain, as if the taste of compromise was a bitter draught. But there, before the watchful stares of the entire court, he sneered and made a grand gesture with his hand. "If it pleases the court, then perhaps the traitor shall live. Let him rot in a cell." Cersei exhaled softly and Ned almost collapsed in relief as Ser Island Payne lowered the sword. Every muscle in his body trembled, half from shock and half from the sudden wave of hope. He sensed a ripple among the gold cloaks and he wondered if Joffrey could retract his words, demand his head after all. But the moment passed. He was seized by a pair of guards and dragged away. Their grip was rough on his arms, but it was life, it was breath, and he followed them, stumbling as they pulled him down the corridor toward his old cell in the black bowels of the Red Keep. He would remain there for weeks, uncertain of his fate, until the hand of the gods, or the great game of men, relented and offered him a different path. Cersei Lannister was no fool. She knew that executing Ned Stark would have unleashed the North's wrath. With the War of the Five Kings already looming, Tywin Lannister had demanded that she keep Sansa and Arya as hostages to ensure the North's good behavior. A living Ned Stark was more valuable as a bargaining chip. She had to maneuver swiftly to ensure Joffrey's tantrums did not undo the delicate webs of power the Lannisters had spun. Thus, in the weeks that followed as the War of the Five Kings began, Ned found himself neither free nor condemned to death. He was a prisoner, but his daughters were allowed glimpses of him, albeit heavily guarded ones. Sansa would weep and beg for his mercy, telling him the little bits of court gossip she heard, praying that King Joffrey would release him if she were obedient enough. Arya, who had been found lurking in Flea Bottom by Yoren of the Night's Watch, sneaked in once, disguised as a page, to grip her father's hands through the bars and promise that she was learning to hide in plain sight. Ned wept with relief to see her alive. This fragile stasis endured while the realm tore itself apart. Robb Stark called his banners and was hailed the king in the north after forging victory upon victory against Lannister forces. Renly Baratheon claimed the crown, forging an alliance with House Tyrell. Stannis Baratheon declared himself Robert's true heir, mustering an army at Dragonstone. Balon Greyjoy sent his Iron-born raiders to pillage the coasts. Meanwhile, across the narrow sea, rumors flitted of a Targaryen princess gathering followers and dragons. The realm was a tinderbox of ambition waiting for the next spark. Little did Ned know that his survival had already changed the shape of events. Tyrion Lannister was the next pivot point in the chain. Upon returning from the Vale, he found Ned Stark languishing in a cell. With the savvy that only the imp possessed, he realized that while Ned remained, so did a chance at forging peace with Robb Stark. Robb, who had grown unstoppable, winning every battle on the field. Tyrion pressed, cajoled, and orchestrated an arrangement behind the scenes. Cersei, reluctant and cornered, agreed to something approximate to house arrest. Ned was moved from the cells to more comfortable, if locked, chambers in Maegor's Holdfast. His comfort was minimal, but it was far better than the dungeons. He was allowed visitors, though heavily supervised. Tyrion himself visited often, seeking any leverage that might lead to an end of these destructive wars. Ned saw an unlikely glint of reason in the dwarf's mismatched eyes. Their first exchange was laced with mutual wariness. "You'd think a man would be grateful to see the sun after weeks in the dark," Tyrion said one afternoon as he entered Ned's chamber. "But perhaps you Starks are so used to winter gloom that you felt quite at home down there." Ned straightened, resting a hand on the rough wood of the table in the center of the room. "It is better than losing my head," he said flatly. Tyrion offered a crooked smile. "That it is." A silence followed. The only sound was the crackling fire in the hearth. At length Ned spoke. "You want something from me, Lannister?" Tyrion shrugged. "I want an end to this war. You see, my father wages battles on every flank, my dear nephew is an unstable boy with far too much power, and the rest of the realm is fracturing like a poorly made shield. My sister is cunning, but even her cunning has limits. And I find that people who can help me solve problems have great value." Ned lifted his gaze. "And you think I can help you solve problems? You're a symbol, Lord Stark. A symbol of the North, of honor, of wrongdoing done by the crown. If we can show the realm that you live, perhaps that will cool your son's rage. Perhaps we can broker in exchange your freedom and your daughters for peace." Ned's eyes flashed. "You cannot possibly believe Robb would kneel to the same king who held me prisoner. He was declared king in the North. The North remembers." Tyrion tapped a finger on the table. "Indeed. But perhaps the North may bend if we can curb Joffrey's worst impulses, if we can restore some measure of justice. Wars are costly, Lord Stark. Everyone is tired of them. Even the newly crowned kings, I suspect, must be dreaming of their childhood beds at night." Ned studied Tyrion. There was something about him, intellect and cunning, but also a weariness. Or was it a sliver of compassion? It was strange to think the Lannister imp might be the only truly rational soul in King's Landing. After a moment, Ned inclined his head. "I will consider what you have said." "Considering is all I can ask," Tyrion said with a sigh, turning to leave. At the door, he paused and cast Ned one more thoughtful look. "If your son wins the war, you will go free, no doubt. If we win, well, I hope you keep your head. Just think carefully, peace is in short supply these days. It's all any of us want." Then the door closed, leaving Ned Stark alone with the swirl of half-formed hopes and the memory of honor. The tide of war slowed, but only because winter storms battered the riverlands, freezing armies in their tracks. From his vantage point in King's Landing, Ned heard scraps of news. Tywin marched west to deal with Stannis' threat at one point, then doubled back to confront Robb near the Twins. Great battles raged along the Trident and the Neck. The king in the north won again and again, capturing Jaime Lannister in a daring ambush. Ned's heart swelled with pride and terror at every rumor of Robb's feats. Finally, word came to Ned one crisp morning. The door to his chamber rattled. and a guard ushered in Sansa, eyes brimming with tears of relief. She lunged to embrace her father, and Ned's arms wrapped around her in a fierce hug. Behind her stood Cersei Lannister, as cold and regal as a statue. "My lord father," Sansa whispered, sobbing into Ned's chest. "They're letting me see you," they said. "They said the war might be over soon." Ned glanced warily at Cersei. "Is that so?" The Queen Regent leveled him with a look. "Discussions are underway to arrange a peace. But your son, as you say, is stubbornly refusing any settlement unless you are released to him. Tyrion has gone north to treat with Robb. We shall see if a compromise can be reached." Ned felt his pulse hammer. "My son will not trust your words alone." Cersei's lips curved in a mirthless smile. "That is why we have Tywin Lannister. And that is why we have your dear friend, or should I say your old confidant, Peter Baelish, lurking about. He is quite adept at forging agreements." A jolt of anger rolled through Ned. Peter Baelish, that master of whispers and illusions, had been the one who betrayed him when Robert died. "I will never trust that man." "You need not trust him," Cersei said, her voice an airy, dismissive thing. "You need only to accept a settlement that will keep your head on your shoulders and your beloved daughters safe. I suggest you do not waste this chance, Lord Stark. The realm is in tatters and we are all in need of respite." Sansa clutched her father's arm. Ned felt the trembling in her fingers. He recalled how young she truly was. Guilt and sorrow warred in his chest. He closed his eyes a moment, remembering the broken oath to his dead sister, the secret of Jon Snow's birth. That memory often haunted him in the quiet of the night, a painful secret he had carried for decades. Now it felt almost distant, overshadowed by the immediate terror of war and the heartbreak of captivity. But that secret still mattered, though he could not yet see how it might shape the future. The negotiations took weeks, but a form of battered peace was finally brokered. Too much had changed for Robb to simply lay down his arms and kneel. He refused. In the end, the Lannisters, pressed by enemies on every side, conceded that the North might govern itself, at least for a time. King Joffrey would remain in King's Landing, crowned by the royal septon, but the North and the Riverlands would be recognized as a separate kingdom so long as they did not march south. Hostilities would be paused. The lords paramount of the rest of the realm would be free to declare for Renly or Stannis or Joffrey as they chose, so long as no one threatened the neutrality of the North. The war would not be truly over, but an uneasy ceasefire with House Stark was better than perpetual bloodshed. In the midst of these swirling deals, Ned was released. Under the watchful eye of Lannister guards, he and his daughters boarded a ship bound for White Harbor. Tyrion Lannister stood on the docks, a pensive look on his face as the sea breeze ruffled his hair. He offered Ned a polite nod as though to say, "This is the best I could do." Then the sails unfurled and King's Landing faded from view behind them. Ned felt the weight of King Robert's last days lift from his shoulders. But the questions remained: how long would this uneasy truce hold? And what of the other kings, Stannis, Renly, Balon, the Targaryen girl across the sea? It was a cold, moonlit night when Ned and his daughters arrived in White Harbor, greeted by Lord Wyman Manderly's retinue. The men bowed low, near tears at the sight of their returned lord. Sansa gasped at the crisp air and the swirl of snowflakes that glimmered under torchlight. Winter was coming, and it was no mere motto. The wind's bite told them it was nearly here. From White Harbor, they traveled north to Moat Cailin, where Robb Stark awaited them. Ned trembled at the sight of his son, no longer a boy, but a young man hardened by war. Robb wore a crown of bronze and iron, the pelt of a direwolf across his shoulders. When he saw his father, relief and love brightened his face, and he knelt in the snow, tears brimming. Sansa ran into his arms. Behind him stood the great lords of the North, the great Jon Umber, Roose Bolton, Galbart Glover, Meege Mormont, and others. All stared, unable to fully believe that Eddard Stark lived. Ned nearly collapsed into Robb's embrace. The father in him wanted nothing but to hold his boy, who had led armies and borne the weight of kingship. "You've done well," Ned murmured, voice thick. "You kept our family safe." Robb choked on a half-laugh. "I tried." They made camp that night, feasting under tents as wind howled across the marshes. Lords and ladies drank to Ned's return. For a moment, the North rejoiced in a fragile sense of triumph. But nights in the North rarely stay peaceful for long. As the fires dwindled, Ned stood alone outside his tent, gazing into the distance. Snow drifted in lazy spirals, catching moonlight on each flake. He thought of Caitlin. She was still at Riverrun, forging alliances with the Tullus. He thought of Bran and Rickon, left behind in Winterfell. And, inevitably, he thought of Jon Snow. Jon was at the wall, presumably with the Night's Watch. Ned could not help but wonder if the boy had learned anything of his true parentage. Surely not. Ned had guarded that truth for so long, even from his wife. He remembered Lyanna's dying words, "Promise me, Ned. Promise me." And so he had. The secret weighed on him as heavily as ever. But as the winter wind hissed over the stones and as war threatened to flare anew across the continent, Ned found himself reconsidering old decisions. The realm had splintered under the pretext of legitimacy. Who was the rightful king? Who was the rightful heir? And in the darkness beyond the wall, an ancient threat stirred, a threat that did not care for crowns or lineages but would kill without distinction. If the truth of Jon's heritage came to light, might it unite or further divide the realm? Ned could not say. He only knew that he had promised his sister. Promises made in love sometimes demanded a sacrifice. He had lived, but had he done more harm than good by keeping silent? Still, the time did not seem right to reveal what he knew. Not yet, perhaps. Ned set forth with Robb's army back to Winterfell. Along the way, Ned reacquainted himself with his bannermen. They told stories of Robb's victories, how the young wolf had outmaneuvered Tywin's forces countless times, how the direwolf Grey Wind had sown terror among the enemy's horses. Ned listened with a mixture of pride and sorrow. He wanted to know every detail of the battles, the men lost, the alliances formed. He took careful note of Roose Bolton's quiet cunning, of the Greyjoy's boisterous loyalty, of Theon Greyjoy's uncertain glances. Theon had once been Ned's ward, but now Theon was at Robb's side. Ned could see a longing in Theon's eyes for the Iron Islands. He wondered if that restlessness might prove dangerous. When they finally arrived at Winterfell, snow blanketed the courtyard. Bran and Rickon rushed out to meet them, accompanied by Hodder. Bran was perched upon Hodder's back, his legs wrapped in thick furs. Ned's heart twisted at the sight of Bran's broken body, but his son wore a resolute expression, more grown than Ned could have imagined. Rickon, so small yet so fierce, clung to Ned's leg, tears glistening. Shaggy Dog and Summer, their direwolves, padded in the snow, watchful and silent. Sansa and Arya, tears in their eyes, joined the younger brothers. They were all together, a family that had been pulled so far apart. That night in the great hall a feast was held. Mead, ale, roasted boar, mutton, and spiced wine overflowed. The northern lords and ladies welcomed Ned Stark home with raucous cheers. Ghostly outlines of dire wolves were painted on the banners, flickering in the firelight. Outside, the sky unleashed a flurry of snow, but inside was warmth, laughter, and hope. Yet as the night's merriment gave way to hushed conversations, Ned retreated to his solar. He could not fully enjoy the feast. The realm was still in chaos. The Targaryen girl, Daenerys, was rumored to have dragons, an impossible thought that made him shiver. Dragons, in this day and age? Stannis and Renly were still at each other's throats in the south. Joffrey sat on the Iron Throne, a vicious child with Lannister gold behind him. The North stood alone, allied with the Riverlands, but precarious. And there was the matter of the White Walkers, half-forgotten legends whispered by old Nan. If even half of what his son Jon wrote in his letters from Castle Black was true, then the realm faced a threat greater than any contested crown. Jon's letters. Ned had received only a few, briefer than normal. The last had contained a hint of desperation, mentioning whites and the dead rising. But the letter had been overshadowed by Robb's war and Ned's captivity. Now, safe within Winterfell's sturdy walls, Ned read Jon's words again. Could it be true? Did the others truly stir beyond the wall? Ned sent ravens to the Night's Watch, inquiring after Jon's welfare and requesting more detail. He thought often of journeying there himself to see. But for now, the North needed him here. He was father to a king, a piece on the board of power. Yet Ned felt the tug. If dire threats were looming beyond the wall, how could he ignore them? Time passed in a swirl of anxious half-peace. With each passing moon, the snows grew heavier. Scouts reported wildling gatherings in the far north, rumors of strange undead. But the lords of the realm, caught in the quagmire of southern politics, gave little mind to the ravings of the Night's Watch. Ned Stark listened. He had always believed that winter was more than just a season. It was an oncoming trial. Robb, too, was restless. Though he had agreed to the ceasefire, he had sworn to be king in the north until the injustices done to their family were righted. He worried that Joffrey might break the fragile truce at any moment, or that Stannis or Renly would march on the north eventually. The nights were filled with war councils in Winterfell's great halls, with Maester's ravens squawking as messages came and went. Some bannermen insisted they should strike again, while the Lannisters were occupied by fighting in the Crownlands. Others counseled caution, pointing to the thickening snows and the danger of moving an army in winter. Ned watched these debates quietly, offering counsel when asked, but mostly letting Robb assume the mantle of kingship. Ned would have been content to fade into a position of advisory if not for the chilling knowledge that an older, darker enemy might be coming. One night, a raven arrived from the wall, carrying a letter stamped with the black wax of the Night's Watch. It was short but urgent. Lord Eddard Stark, we have grave news. The dead rise north of the wall. We have fought whites in the frost. White walkers have been sighted. I, Jon Snow, have taken vows to defend the realm against such terrors. We beg the lords of Westeros to hear our plea. The great ranging led by Lord Commander Mormont discovered these horrors firsthand. We lost many brothers. Winter is truly here, and with it an ancient menace. We need men. We need help. Signed, Jon Snow. Steward to Lord Commander Mormont. Night's Watch. Ned showed the letter to Robb, who frowned over every word. The Greyjohn dismissed it as ghost stories. Roose Bolton said the letter might be a trick, or at the very least an exaggeration, trying to lure the North's armies away from more pressing conflicts. Others took the letter seriously but wondered what could possibly be done. The realm had no shortage of threats, and all the old alliances were broken. But Ned believed Jon. He believed in the power of winter's darkest tales. So he stood from his seat at the high table and spoke with the quiet authority of a man who had seen enough tragedy to fill lifetimes. We are the North, he said. We have always known that these stories are not just stories. We talk of kings and crowns while the true enemy gathers beyond the wall. We must answer this call or we will have no kingdom at all. A hush fell across the lords. Robb studied his father's face, the certainty in his eyes. At length Robb nodded. We will send word to the Night's Watch. We will prepare. If this threat is real, we cannot ignore it. In that moment, Ned felt a faint glimmer of hope. Perhaps the North could stand united against the coming storm. Perhaps the realm, fractured though it was, might come together if the threat was dire enough. But such unity would require the truth, and that included truths that Ned had locked away for decades. That same night, as he paced the corridors of Winterfell, he found himself gripped by an idea. Jon Snow's parentage might matter more than he had ever dreamed. If the White Walkers truly threatened every corner of the Seven Kingdoms, if the realm needed a rallying point, a symbol, who better than one who carried Targaryen blood and Stark blood both? A song of ice and fire indeed. The notion filled him with dread and wonder. His sister Lyanna had entrusted him with this secret so that Robert Baratheon and the realm would not murder her child. But Robert was dead now, and the realm needed a unifier. Daenerys Targaryen was rumored to have dragons, but who knew how she might wield them? A rightful Targaryen Stark heir might bridge the gaps. Yet would the realm accept such a revelation? And would Jon himself want it? For nights, Ned wrestled with the choice. He had promised Lyanna he would protect Jon at all costs. Revealing him as Rhaegar Targaryen's son could paint a target on his back once more. The Lannisters, the Baratheons, the Tyrells, any might see him as a threat. But if the truth brought the realm together to fight the Walkers, was it not worth the risk? He debated privately with his wife, Catelyn, who had returned from Riverrun. She was aghast at first, reeling from the realization that Jon was not Ned's bastard but the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. It explained so much. Ned's strange protectiveness, the secrecy. Tears filled her eyes. If this is true, she whispered in shock, the boy has a claim to the Iron Throne. He does, Ned admitted, voice low. A stronger claim than any alive, perhaps. But that does not mean he must pursue it. I only know that the realm may need him, his blood, his lineage, if the White Walkers truly come. Catelyn looked away, fists clenched. Old resentment died hard. She had spent years seething over this so-called bastard. But now she realized Ned had done it for Lyanna to keep her child safe from Robert's wrath. An avalanche of conflicting emotions tumbled across her face. Finally, she spoke softly. Does Jon know? No, Ned's voice was hoarse. I never told anyone. The silence stretched between them. At last, Catelyn nodded resolutely. Then you must tell him. But do so carefully. If Joffrey or Renly or Stannis discovers, they might see Jon as a threat. We have no guarantee that proclaiming him will unite the realm. Ned exhaled. I know, but I can keep the secret no longer. He must be told, especially if the walkers come. If Daenerys Targaryen lands with her dragons, if the Night's Watch truly needs aid. Jon has a part to play. Catelyn closed her eyes, tears brimming again. I will stand by you, Eddard. For all the anger I once felt toward that boy, I realize now it was misplaced. He's your blood, and he is Lyanna's son. Ned drew her close, relief flooding him that after so many lies, he did not have to stand alone. He prepared letters to Jon at the wall, summoning him to Winterfell. A summons from the Lord of Winterfell would be unusual for a man of the Night's Watch, but these were unusual times. Ned hoped Jon might be granted temporary leave to treat with the king in the north about the growing threat. He sealed the letter with the dire wolf sigil and sent it off by Raven. Then he waited. Jon Snow arrived before winter's end, escorted by a small party of Black brothers led by Lord Commander Jeor Mormont himself. The old bear had marched a handful of his men through the raging winds and snows, a testament to how dire the situation must be at the wall. Jon looked older, leaner, with a seriousness in his dark eyes that reminded Ned uncannily of Lyanna. A battered cloak of black swirled around him, dusted with snow. Ghost padded silently at his side, red eyes watchful. The moment Jon stepped into the great hall, Ned saw something flicker across his face, a mixture of joy and uncertainty. It was not often the Watch was invited to such receptions. Lords of the North rose from their seats to greet Mormont with respect, though some glanced uneasily at Jon. They remembered him as a bastard of Winterfell, now sworn to the Night's Watch. He wore that oath on his clothes, in the crowblack he bore. Ned waited until the initial welcomes were done. Then he stepped forward, placing a hand on Jon's shoulder. Welcome home, my son. Jon's eyes glistened with emotion he barely kept in check. Lord Stark, he said, quiet but firm. Thank you for inviting me. We came because the threat we face cannot be ignored. They spoke little more in public that night as the matter of the White Walkers and Whites was addressed. The hall was tense. Some lords believed every word. Others grumbled that the wildlings had concocted tales to frighten the Watch. But the presence of Lord Commander Mormont, with his commanding voice and sincerity, swayed the doubters. Mormont described how they'd found dead men who rose again, eyes pale blue, flesh as cold as ice. He told of a fierce battle in the snow, how fire was needed to slay the Whites. And if the White Walkers return in force, he thundered, all the petty crowns in the south will matter for naught. They are the true enemy. Ever patient, ever watchful, waiting for winter's cold to strengthen their ranks. Ned, seated beside his son Robb, listened with grim determination. That night, the lords pledged more men to the wall's defense. Grain and supplies would be sent to Castle Black, Eastwatch, and the Shadow Tower, even as winter made travel perilous. In the hush that followed, Ned rose to address the hall. My friend, King Robert, once said that only death could pay for life. We in the North know that winter is not a mere season, but a test of our resolve and unity. As King Robb's father, and as Warden of the North before him, I declare we shall stand with the Night's Watch, no matter the cost. The lords of the North rapped their cups on the wooden tables in approval. Mormont bowed his head, respectful, though a flicker of gratitude shone in his eyes. Meanwhile, Jon stood at the edge of the dais, his face overshadowed by a swirl of complicated feelings. Ned could see it there. The longing to be recognized by the family he had left behind, the duty to the Night's Watch. It pained Ned to watch him from a distance, remembering his vow to Lyanna. Later, in a private solar lit by a single flickering lantern, Ned met with Jon alone. The wind rattled the shutters. The chamber was sparsely decorated with dark wood furniture and the banner of House Stark. Jon stood rigid, uncertain why his lord father had called him here. Ghost lay at his feet, head resting on his paws. Jon, Ned said softly, stepping forward. I asked you to come because there is something you must know, something I should have told you long ago. Jon frowned. My lord, I don't understand. Ned felt his heart pound against his ribs. The old fear rose that telling Jon would doom him to the fate Rhaegar had met. But Robert was gone. The realm had changed, and an even more fearsome enemy loomed. Ned drew in a breath, recalling Lyanna's face, the final promise she had exacted from him in the Tower of Joy. You have always wondered about your mother, Ned began, voice trembling slightly. I led you to believe she was a common woman. I betted on the way to war that you were my bastard. I did it to protect you. If it had been known you were not truly my son, men would have killed you without a second thought. Jon's eyes widened. Not truly your son? No, Ned said quickly, you are my blood, but not as you think. Your mother was my sister, Lyanna Stark. John's face went pale, and he shook his head as if the words made no sense. Your sister? That would make me your nephew. Yes, Ned said quietly. And your father was Rhaegar Targaryen. John stumbled back as if struck. His breath came shallow, and Ghost rose, sensing his alarm. The lantern's flame flickered ominously, shadows dancing on the walls. John's voice was a whisper. That cannot be. Rhaegar died before I was born. Yes, Ned said. He died on the Trident, fighting for the crown he believed was his by right. He loved your mother, John. She loved him. They were secretly wed before the war. But Robert Baratheon hated Rhaegar, hated all Targaryens. If he had known you existed, he would have killed you as he killed Rhaegar's other children. John's brow furrowed in anguish. He stared at Ned, searching for any hint of falsehood. Then he closed his eyes. So all these years, you let me believe I was your shame. You let me believe my mother was some nameless woman. Tears pricked at Ned's eyes. I did it to protect you. And I would do it again if it meant keeping you safe. But now the realm is in greater peril than it has ever been, and the truth might serve a higher purpose. You have a claim to the Iron Throne, John. And you have Stark blood and Targaryen blood, both a union of fire and ice. John paced, his breath ragged. I am a brother of the Night's Watch. My vows. I am sworn to hold no lands, father no children. Ned's heart clenched. Of course, the boy had pledged his life to the Watch. I know, he said softly. But we face a threat that transcends all vows. The White Walkers won't care if you've sworn to wear black until you die. And if you are indeed the heir to House Targaryen, it may be that the dragons across the sea or your own heritage could prove crucial to saving the realm. John sank into a chair, pressing the heels of his hands to his eyes. All my life, I wanted to be a Stark. Now I find I'm a Targaryen? It feels like a cruel jest. Ned knelt beside him, putting a hand on his shoulder. You are both, John. My sister's blood flows in your veins and your father's. I cannot say what your path should be. I only know that the truth needed to be told. Silence spun out, broken only by the wind howling against the window. At length, John took a shaky breath. Does King Robb know? Not yet, Ned answered. Nor does your mother, Catelyn, nor do my sons and daughters. I told your lady aunt because I had to. But I wanted you to hear it from me first. John nodded, eyes distant. I must think on this. But the Watch, my brothers need me. The Lord Commander. A heavy knock interrupted them. Lord Commander Mormont stood at the threshold, his frame filling the doorway. He eyed John and Ned with curiosity. The storms grow worse, he said. And I have business at Castle Black. We must be returning, Lord Stark. If there's more to be said, let it be said soon. We ride at first light. Ned rose, exchanging a meaningful look with John. The truth is yours now. Whatever you decide to do with it, I will stand by you. John merely nodded, speechless, and followed Mormont out. Dawn broke pale and gray. John departed with the Night's Watch, a swirl of questions plaguing him. He gave only a curt farewell, eyes troubled, leaving Ned feeling hollow but relieved to have finally unburdened himself. He prayed to the old gods and knew that the boy would find his destiny in this mad, broken realm. The winds grew harsher each day and the land was locked in ice. Yet Ned felt the inexorable march of fate as tangibly as the gathering snowdrifts in the courtyard. News from the south trickled in. Renly Baratheon was slain under mysterious circumstances rumored to be dark magic. Stannis marched on King's Landing was repelled by Tyrion's wildfire. Tywin Lannister had retaken the capital, forging new alliances. Meanwhile, Daenerys Targaryen had conquered parts of Slaver's Bay with her young dragons. Every corner of the world reeled under conflict as if the gods themselves were tossing the dice of destiny. In the north, the uneasy peace with the Lannisters held for a time, though Robb's bannermen hungered for more conquests. A letter arrived from the Iron Islands, proclaiming Balon Greyjoy's intention to name himself King of the Isles and the North if the North would bow. Robb refused, and Theon Greyjoy soon vanished from Winterfell, departing under the cover of darkness to join his father's cause. Ned felt uneasy about that, an omen of betrayal yet to come. But all such concerns paled when a raven arrived from Castle Black weeks later, addressed to Ned and Robb both. The letter stated that Jon Snow had traveled beyond the Wall with a group of rangers seeking to learn more about the White Walkers' movements. He had not returned. Lord Commander Mormont feared the worst. Ned's blood ran cold. The child he had raised as his own, lioness boy, burdened with a secret heritage, was out there in the bitter wastes, lost or worse. Without waiting for counsel, Ned declared he would go to the wall, father or no. He was no longer the warden of the North, as Robb was now king, but he remained a Stark, and the wall was his responsibility, too. Robb insisted on accompanying him at least partway, but the realm needed its king in the North. In the end, Ned and a small party of loyal men set out, braving the icy roads on horseback, heading for Castle Black. The journey was harrowing. Snowdrifts towered, storms lashed them. Wolves howled in the dark pines. But Ned felt possessed by a fierce determination. He had not saved Jon from King Joffrey, from Robert's wrath, from the Lannisters' machinations, only to lose him to the icy night beyond the wall. At last, they arrived at the wall itself. The colossal edifice of ice stretched across the horizon, a shimmering barrier in the winter sun. At Castle Black, the men of the Night's Watch bustled about in grim efficiency. Mormont greeted Ned with a grave nod. "Lord Stark, you come at a dark time. Rangers have gone missing. Wildlings stir. Our scouts say they have seen whites roaming at night." Ned wasted no time with pleasantries. "Where's Jon Snow?" Mormont's face was ashen. He and a handful of brothers went north to investigate rumors of a White Walker sighting. They were due back 5 days past. We sent out a search party. Found no trace beyond some footprints in the snow. We fear they may have been taken, or worse. Ned's heart sank. He felt the old grief tightening in his chest. The memory of losing his father, brother, sister. He would not lose Jon too, not if there was any chance of saving him. "I will lead another search. Give me men who know the terrain." Mormont eyed him. "Your place is here, behind the wall, not out in the wild. Let my rangers handle it." But Ned shook his head firmly. "Jon Snow is my blood. I owe him my life 1,000 times over. I am going." Mormont studied Ned for a moment, then nodded. "So be it. Dress warm, my lord. We leave in the morning." Thus began a desperate foray into the haunted forests and frozen valleys north of the wall. The small party consisted of Ned, several of his loyal guards, and a cadre of seasoned rangers led by Mormont. They pushed through snow up to their knees, forging onward under gray skies. The wind was razor-sharp, each gust feeling like knives on exposed skin. At night, they built fires huddled close, listening to the eerie moan of the wind through the trees. They found tracks in the snow, signs of skirmishes, scattered patches of disturbed earth. Once, they came upon the frozen remains of a wildling scout, half buried in a snowdrift, eyes glazed with terror. Each day they pressed farther. Hope dimmed with every dawn. They were nearing the dreaded Frostfangs, the mountainous region rumored to harbor the worst of the wildlings and, if rumors were true, the White Walkers themselves. Ned's men whispered prayers to the old gods. Then, one afternoon, when the light was faint behind a curtain of cloud, they stumbled upon a small camp tucked beside a frozen creek. At first, it appeared deserted. Closer inspection revealed the bodies of 3 black brothers. They were arranged in a grotesque tableau, limbs twisted as if they had been slain by something inhuman. Ned knelt beside one corpse, gently turning it. His breath caught. The man's eyes were open, but the color had gone pale blue, not a natural shade. A slash across his torso showed blackened, frostbitten flesh. It was as if the body had been partially transformed into something else. Mormont swore under his breath. One of the rangers made the sign of the 7. But then Ned heard a faint sound, a ragged cook. Heart pounding, he sprang up and followed the noise to a nearby cluster of boulders. There, half buried in snow, lay Jon Snow, shivering and delirious. His sword was clenched in his numb fingers, eyes glassy. Blood stained his cloak. Ghost stood guard, hackles raised, snarling at anyone who drew too near. "Jon!" Ned cried, rushing over. Jon blinked, barely conscious. "Father," he managed, voice a rasp. Ned knelt beside him, ignoring the biting cold, ignoring everything but relief flooding through him. Ghost relaxed at the sound of Ned's voice. Together, they gently lifted Jon, checking for injuries. He was freezing, near death from exposure. His leg bore a jagged wound, likely from a White's blade or a White Walker's unnatural weapon. The men hurried to set up a tent, build a fire, treat him as best they could. Mormont oversaw the grim task of burning the dead black brothers, lest they rise again. The stench was foul, but it had to be done. For days, Jon hovered at the edge of death. Fever gripped him, his body fighting the venomous chill that radiated from the White Walker's wound. Ned stayed by his side, feeding him spoonfuls of broth, stroking his hair as he muttered in delirium. Sometimes Jon cried out for Uncle Benjen, sometimes for Arya or Robb, sometimes for a woman's face in the darkness that Ned guessed was Ygritte, the wildling girl he had once overheard rumor of. But occasionally Jon would choke on words about the crown, about Targaryen flames, about duty. Ned squeezed his hand, praying that the boy would live. At last, they dared the journey back. Mormont argued that they should keep searching for other missing rangers, but Ned insisted on returning at once to save Jon's life. They were battered by storms, harried by wights who lurked in the shadows, but with careful discipline and well-stoked fires they managed to fight them off. It was as if the others were testing the Night's Watch, prodding for weakness. The men grew more certain of the threat with every encounter. By the time they reached the wall again, each had the haunted look of someone who had glimpsed nightmares made real. They carried Jon into Castle Black's infirmary, where Maester Aemon, stooped with age and nearly blind, tended him. Maester Aemon was a Targaryen himself, old and wise, and Ned felt a chill as the ancient man seemed to sense Jon's hidden lineage. Aemon said nothing, but Ned caught the faint spark of recognition in his cloudy eyes when he pressed a wrinkled hand to Jon's brow. Days passed. Jon's fever broke. Slowly he regained strength, though his leg wound would leave a scar. In that time, Ned learned more of the horrors that lurked beyond the wall, the wights gathering in greater numbers, the White Walkers leading them with silent malice. The wildlings, too, were amassing, led by a self-styled king beyond the wall named Mance Rayder. A wave of chaos was building, all pointing south. When Jon was able to stand on his own, Ned visited him in the warmth of a small chamber near the infirmary. The boy was pale but determined, leaning on a cane. Ghost lay at his feet. "I'm told I owe you my life," Jon said softly. "Thank you, Father." Ned laid a hand on his shoulder. "You owe me nothing. I did as I had to for your family. Jon, about what I told you." Jon's expression shadowed. "It changes nothing about my duty here. I am a man of the Night's Watch, no matter my blood. We need all the help we can get to fight this. But if I truly have Targaryen blood, then perhaps I can help unite the realm against the threat." Ned felt a surge of pride. "That is what I hope, Jon. The Walkers are an enemy to every man, woman, and child in the Seven Kingdoms. If your lineage can help gather allies, we must try." Jon's jaw clenched. "I know little of kings or politics. But if we can bring the North, the Riverlands, perhaps even the Lannisters or the Tyrells to bear against this threat, I'll do whatever it takes. Even if it means proclaiming my birthright." Ned bowed his head, overwhelmed by emotion. "Your father, Rhaegar, was a good man by many accounts. A dreamer, a man who believed in prophecy. He might have believed your birth was part of something larger. I do not know if that is true, but I do know that you have a role to play, Jon. And I will stand by you." Jon clasped his father's hand, both men letting the weight of that moment settle. Events moved swiftly after that. On the far side of the sea, Daenerys Targaryen's dragons grew, and she set her sights on Westeros. Word reached Castle Black that Stannis Baratheon had come north to the Wall, intending to fight the wildlings and claim the North's allegiance. But in this new timeline, Ned Stark was there to meet him, not only to treat with him but to reveal a shocking truth. Rhaegar Targaryen's trueborn son was alive and serving in the Night's Watch. For Stannis, a man of duty and law, the revelation was staggering. Jon's claim was more legitimate than any Baratheon or Lannister claim, surpassing even Stannis's rightful claim over Joffrey. At first, Stannis was furious, suspecting a trick. But Melisandre, his Red Priestess, was strangely intrigued, speaking in cryptic riddles about Azor Ahai and the prince that was promised. Jon Snow's Targaryen blood, combined with his upbringing in the north, drew her fascination. Eventually, she convinced Stannis that Jon might indeed be part of a grand prophecy to save the realm from the darkness. A fragile alliance formed at the Wall, Stannis's army, the Night's Watch, and Ned Stark, all dedicated to halting the wildling invasion and preparing for the far greater threat of the others. Jon, torn between his vows and the realm's desperate need for leadership, became the focus of swirling prophecies. Reluctantly, guided by his father and urged by the Red Priestess's murmurings, Jon accepted that he might have to step into a royal role. But first, they had to deal with Mance Rayder's vast wildling host. Under Ned's counsel, Stannis rode out to meet them at the Frostfangs. Jon, though still weak from his injuries, insisted on accompanying them. He had friends among the wildlings. Ygritte had shown him a side of them he never knew. He realized their flight south was due to the others, not mere conquest. Using that understanding, he brokered a truce. The wildlings would be allowed to pass the wall, settle in the gift if they bent the knee to Stannis or, in time, to the true king. Many wildlings refused, but many more agreed, desperate to survive. The battle that might have been a slaughter was instead a harrowing negotiation, with swords drawn in tension but never fully unleashed. In the aftermath, Stannis's men built a precarious peace, though some lords from the north were outraged that Ned would let wildlings cross their borders. Ned's rebuttal was simple. Better the wildlings become our allies than our enemies, especially when the others come. Meanwhile, in the south, the War of the Five Kings sputtered on. But news began to spread that Eddard Stark was alive and forging alliances at the Wall. Rumors abounded that Stark had discovered a hidden Targaryen heir among the Black brothers. Cersei dismissed it as nonsense, but Tyrion, now acting as hand, took the rumor seriously. Word trickled to the Tyrells. Whispers flew across the sea to Daenerys. Like a spark in a field of dry grass, the rumor of a living Targaryen prince with a northern father ignited imaginations. Then Daenerys landed on Dragonstone with a small but growing army and 3 living dragons. She called upon the great houses to declare for her. Some answered, believing her to be the rightful queen. Others hesitated, hearing contradictory whispers that Rhaegar's son had survived. Rival Targaryen claims threatened to split potential support. All the while, the White Walkers grew bolder in the far north, an icy tide creeping closer. Stannis, unwavering in his sense of duty, pressed Ned and Jon for a decision. If you are Rhaegar's heir, he said to Jon, you must claim it openly. You must rally the lords of Westeros to fight this war. Show them there is one Targaryen who stands for the living, not a foreign queen with dragons. I do not seek the throne for myself if you prove your claim, but I demand your loyalty in this war. Jon, deeply conflicted, turned to his father. Ned spoke with grim conviction. The realm needs a single banner to unite behind. The threat of the others cannot be ignored any longer. If Daenerys is willing to parley, we might ally with her. 2 Targaryen heirs joined against the darkness. Thus, letters were sent, ravens fluttering south. Ned urged Daenerys to treat with them, to come north if she dared. He had no illusions about her trusting them, but he appealed to her sense of duty. They were kin, after all. Jon was the son of her brother, Rhaegar. She was Jon's aunt, though barely older than him. If she recognized his claim, or at least recognized the White Walker threat, they could stand side by side. She did come in time. Riding on the back of Drogon, with 2 other dragons flanking her, she arrived at the outskirts of the wall in a spectacle that left the Black brothers gaping. Her Unsullied marched with discipline, her Dothraki blood riders prowled with savage curiosity. Stannis's men bristled, uncertain if this was friend or foe. The northern lords who had accompanied Ned stared with undisguised awe and fear at the living dragons. A great parley was held on the snowy plains beneath the towering wall. Daenerys Targaryen, pale hair streaming behind her, faced Ned Stark, grizzled and grim, and Jon Snow, young but with eyes haunted by knowledge of the north. Daenerys studied Jon with a mixture of wonder and suspicion. You claim to be my nephew, she said softly, each word measured. My brother Rhaegar's son, hidden away for all these years. Jon bowed his head. I claim nothing but the truth if my father speaks truly, and he has never lied to me. I took the black, not knowing my heritage. Now that I do, I make no demands save that we unite to save the realm from the White Walkers. Your dragons may be our best hope, my queen. Her violet eyes flickered with emotion. She saw the sincerity in him, the quiet sorrow. If you are Rhaegar's son, you have a claim as strong as mine. Stronger if he wed Lyanna Stark in truth. Jon's voice dropped. I do not seek the throne, your grace. I am a man of the Night's Watch. But the world has changed, and Stannis interrupted, voice curt. The boy's claim is valid. But if it must be proven, so be it. For now, the White Walkers threaten us all. Daenerys exhaled, looking up at the looming wall. My father was the Mad King. I was taught that Rhaegar was the best of us, but he died too soon. If you are his legacy, perhaps there is hope for House Targaryen's future. At Ned's prompting, they agreed to set aside questions of the Iron Throne until the threat from beyond the wall was extinguished. A grand alliance formed that day, the forces of Stannis Baratheon, the men of the north under Ned Stark, the Night's Watch, and Daenerys Targaryen's dragons and armies. They would march against the others when the time came. Still, rumors spread among both armies that Jon Snow was the true heir. Some whispered he might ride a dragon, that perhaps he was the prince that was promised. Others scoffed. But Daenerys, for her part, was pragmatic enough to see the bigger picture. She needed northern support. And if a White Walker army truly threatened the entire realm, she needed allies. She spoke at length with Jon, learning of his life, his vow, his hardships. She saw the unwavering loyalty he commanded among the Night's Watch, the quiet respect from the wildlings. She found in him a reflection of her own struggle for identity and survival. And so, when at last the White Walkers emerged from the lands of Always Winter, driving an endless horde of whites before them, a great host stood ready, combined forces from across the realm. Even Lannister and Tyrell contingents, war-weary and fearful of the rumored undead, sent soldiers north. Jaime Lannister, no longer the arrogant knight of old, rode under a white banner, uncertain of his place but determined to keep his vow to fight for the living. Tyrion arrived as well, forging a precarious truce with Sansa Stark, who had grown wiser beyond her years. The Knights of the Vale, thanks to Sansa and the cunning manipulations of Peter Baelish, also joined. The largest army Westeros had seen in centuries gathered at the Wall and beyond, drilling daily, forging dragonglass weapons from the obsidian mines on Dragonstone, courtesy of Daenerys. Ned Stark, battered by war and age, stood at the center of this alliance, quietly marveling at how the realm, once fractured, now came together in the face of a common enemy. He knew the cost had been staggering. Countless lives lost, lands ravaged, families torn apart. But in their darkest hour, the Seven Kingdoms rallied, not around a single king at that moment, but around survival itself. The battle was terrifying. The others came in eerie silence, snow swirling around them like ghosts. Their whites, thousands upon thousands, rushed forward with relentless hunger. The dragons roared in the skies, unleashing jets of flame that lit the night with savage brilliance. Daenerys led Drogon into the heart of the undead host, incinerating swathes of whites. Her knights followed, steel flashing. Jon, armed with Longclaw and the knowledge of Dragonglass, led a contingent of wildlings and Night's Watch rangers. They fought valiantly, side by side with the men of the north. Stannis' disciplined troops anchored the line, while a cavalry of Vale Knights charged from the flank. Ned Stark, though no longer young, refused to remain behind. He fought alongside the vanguard, his sword wolf's fang slicing through undead flesh. He beheld horrors he'd never imagined. Corpses that moved even after limbs were hacked away, White Walkers that glided across the snow with inhuman grace, freezing the air with their presence. Dragonglass-tipped arrows whistled through the sky, finding their targets with lethal effect. The entire field was a maelstrom of ice, fire, screams, and the thunder of dragons. It seemed the tide might never end, that the whites would keep coming until every living soul was extinguished. But at the height of the chaos, Jon Snow came face to face with the Night King himself, a tall, otherworldly figure with skin like pale blue ice, eyes aglow with malevolence. The Night King brandished a spear of ice, hurling it with impossible strength at one of Daenerys' dragons, wounding it grievously. The dragon crashed to the ground in a cacophony of shrieks and splintering bone. Jon roared in defiance, staggering toward the Night King. Their clash was swift yet felt suspended in time. Longclaw, crafted of Valyrian steel, met the Night King's ice blade in a hiss of steam and shards. Jon fought with every ounce of skill and fury he possessed. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might fail. The Night King pressed forward, an aura of death emanating from him. Then Daenerys, astride Drogon, swept in overhead, unleashing a torrent of dragon fire. The Night King was momentarily driven back. Jon seized the opening, plunging Longclaw into the Night King's chest. The ice blade shattered, the Night King's form cracking like fragile glass. A haunting shriek ripped across the battlefield before his figure burst into fragments of ice and blew away on the howling wind. Across the field, whites collapsed where they stood, the magic animating them undone. The others fled into the swirling snow, scattering like leaves before a gale. A roar of triumph rose from the living. The Great War, at least this battle, was won. In the aftermath, Ned found Jon standing amid the carnage, battered and exhausted, leaning on Longclaw as if it were a crutch. Snow drifted around them. Corpses, living and dead, lay strewn across the plain. Fires burned here and there. Daenerys dismounted, tears in her eyes for the fallen dragon. She approached Jon, who stared at her with quiet grief. They embraced without words, sharing a moment of profound sorrow for the cost of victory. Ned approached slowly, feeling tears well in his own eyes. He remembered that day in King's Landing when he knelt in the Red Keep, awaiting the sword that never fell. He remembered the day he took baby Jon from his dying sister's arms. He remembered each sacrifice, each betrayal, each moment that led them here. And now, at last, he had seen his boy, no, his nephew, his son, deal the decisive blow that saved the realm. Jon met Ned's gaze, and in that instant, they both understood. Everything had changed. Jon was no mere bastard. He was Aegon Targaryen, sixth of his name, trueborn son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, a living embodiment of two great houses. He had defeated the Night King. If the realm demanded a king, who else could it turn to? In the days that followed, the shattered armies tended their wounded and mourned their dead. The threat of the White Walkers was vanquished, though pockets of undead still wandered the far north. Daenerys, the mother of dragons, found herself looking to Jon, her nephew, for guidance. She had her own claim, her own rightful place on the Iron Throne. But after witnessing Jon's heroism, after seeing how the Northern Lords revered him, she saw that perhaps there was another path. Ned watched them grapple with the future. He saw that Daenerys had grown fond of Jon. He saw in Jon a reluctant acceptance of his destiny. And he knew that the realm, battered as it was, needed stability. Above all, it needed a unifying figure who had proven he would fight for all the living. In a solemn gathering at the foot of the wall, attended by lords and knights from across the Seven Kingdoms, the matter of succession was raised. Stannis, exhausted by war, acknowledged that Jon's claim was stronger, that the dragons answered Daenerys but seemed also to recognize Jon. Tyrion Lannister argued for peace and unity, reminding everyone that continuing the war for the Iron Throne could destroy any chance of rebuilding. With the White Walkers defeated, they had a fleeting chance to mend old wounds. Jon himself stood before them wearing the black cloak of the Watch, battered and torn. He shook his head. "I have sworn vows to the Night's Watch. I never wanted a crown." Daenerys stepped forward, silver-gold hair gleaming in the pale sun. "The Night's Watch was founded to guard the realm against the terrors beyond the wall. You have done that and more. If the realm wills it, I would join our claims, fire and ice united. If you would stand beside me and rule, we can rebuild the Seven Kingdoms and protect it from any future threats." Jon looked to Ned, uncertain. Ned nodded with quiet pride. He saw the love in Daenerys' eyes, the respect in Jon's, and realized that perhaps through their union the realm might finally know a lasting peace. He stepped forward, voice steady. "My nephew has done his duty. He has proven he is worthy. If the realm requires a king and queen, let them be Targaryen and Stark both. Let the lessons of this war guide us to a more just rule." Silence descended. Then slowly men and women across the camp knelt, bowing to Jon and Daenerys. Even Stannis, though he kept his face stern, bent the knee. Tyrion offered a wry bow, the corners of his mouth lifted in relief. Sansa and Arya, watching from the front, exchanged glances of amazement and pride. The wildlings, represented by Tormund Giantsbane, simply stood with arms crossed, grinning. It was done. The newly anointed King Aegon Targaryen, Jon Snow no longer, and Queen Daenerys Targaryen would together claim the Iron Throne. They would forge a new age, one that honored the memory of the Starks, the Targaryens, and all those who had bled for the living. Ned Stark bowed his head. Tears of joy blurred his vision. He recalled Lyanna's plea as she lay dying. "Promise me, Ned. Keep him safe. Through all the trials he had." And now Lyanna's son stood as a beacon of hope, a bridge between past and future, fire and ice. At that moment, as the swirling snow gave way to a pale sun piercing the clouds, Ned felt something like peace. He had lived long enough to see the rightful heir, the best of both houses, crowned. The realm might still face countless challenges, but at least the promise of a brighter tomorrow glowed on the horizon. Ned lifted his gaze to Jon Aegon and nodded. A ghost of a smile tugged at his lips. He thought of how proud Lyanna would be to see her son at last embraced by the realm, not hunted, not feared. And he thought of how Robert, for all his flaws, had once dreamed of a united kingdom, safe from Targaryen threats. Perhaps now, in a strange twist of fate, Robert's dream and Rhaegar's dream might converge. Thunderous cheers rose around them. The living had triumphed. The North and the South, the Watchers on the Wall and the dragons from across the sea had come together to defeat the dark. And as Ned Stark stood among them, alive and witness to it all, he whispered a final prayer of thanks for the grace of the old gods and the new, knowing that at long last, his promise to Lyanna had been fulfilled and the realm stood upon the threshold of a new dawn. Ned Stark stood amid the broken corpses and muddy drifts of snow, the aftermath of the great battle still raw on the field. The wind carried the stench of death, and the sky above was a cold steel gray that gave neither comfort nor omen. Everywhere he turned, he saw wounded soldiers clutching their injuries, half-dead horses breathing their last, the rubble of makeshift barricades strewn with the wreckage of weaponry. Here and there, smoldering fires still crackled, sending thin, acrid smoke toward the clouds. It was a grim portrait, yet it could have been far grimmer. They had earned their victory, driving back the White Walkers, shattering the Night King into shards of frozen mist and putting an end, at least for now, to the immediate threat of the undead tide. Even so, the cost weighed upon every soul who walked that plain. He caught sight of his son, John, or Aegon, as the truth of his parentage now named him. The newly revealed prince still looked like the youth Ned had raised in Winterfell, at least in the set of his shoulders and the shape of his jaw. But there was no missing the change in his eyes. They had grown older, haunted by everything he had endured. He stood with Daenerys Targaryen, his newly acknowledged aunt, and, by the will of men and the swirl of prophecy, his queen and consort. She remained quiet, her posture regal even beneath the grime and weariness of war. Drogon, the largest of her dragons, roosted a short distance away, sniffing at the air laden with the scent of rot and charred flesh. Another of her dragons, Regal, had been wounded. And Viserion, the one lost during their earlier battles with the Night King, was truly gone, destroyed once and for all when Jon had dealt the final blow to the enemy who had corrupted it. The grief was etched upon Daenerys's face, sorrow for the child she had lost as much as for the thousands of men and women who lay dead. Ned approached them carefully, mindful of the dragon's suspicious glare. As he drew near, Daenerys turned her head. Her silver-gold hair was in disarray, streaked with soot and blood. She still looked every inch the queen. Even the dust and ruin of battle could not dim the intensity of her presence. When she saw Ned, her lips curved in a semblance of a respectful smile. For years, Ned had never imagined that House Stark would stand beside a Targaryen again, let alone kneel. But times changed. The White Walkers had reminded them all that the petty squabbles of great houses were nothing in the face of an existential threat. Jon eyed his father, uncle, warily. "We're seeing to the wounded," he said softly, hooking a thumb over his shoulder at the remnants of their makeshift infirmary tents. "The maesters and red priests are doing what they can, but it's not enough." Ned's throat tightened at the sight of so many people from all corners of Westeros and even beyond who had come here to fight. Northern soldiers with heavy furs, southern knights in battered plate, wildlings in piecemeal armor, Dothraki bloodriders unsullied standing in disciplined rows. The entire realm and its allies had converged. And the cost, though inevitable, felt staggering. Yet they had prevailed, which was more than Ned could have hoped for even a handful of moons past. "How many have we lost?" Ned asked, dread creeping through him. Daenerys's gaze swept the battlefield. "Thousands," she said grimly. "We're still counting, but the dead number as high as any major battle in recent memory, likely more than that. If the Night King hadn't been destroyed when he was, if Jon hadn't," she trailed off, her eyes flicking to Jon's drawn face. "We would have been overrun." Jon nodded. "The Whites collapsed once he died, but that doesn't undo what they did before. We'll need to set about cremations immediately, or burials where the ground permits. We can't leave them to freeze or rot." He took a breath and steeled himself. "We should also see to it that no wounded are left behind without help. Some have no arms or legs, some can't walk. We can't afford to lose more good people to infection and cold." Ned laid a hand gently on Jon's shoulder, pride mingling with sorrow. "We'll do what must be done. Let the realm see that we honor every sacrifice." Together, they went among the camp to oversee the grim tasks of gathering bodies and tending to the living. In hushed, exhausted tones, men and women alike offered feeble smiles or respectful nods to Jon, murmuring, "Your Grace," a reminder that the realm had all but anointed him king alongside Daenerys in the hours after the Night King's defeat. Word had already spread, carried in excited whispers by survivors. Aegon Targaryen, sixth of his name, true-born son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, had fulfilled the prophecy of the prince who was promised, or so some claimed. Others insisted that Daenerys, the mother of dragons, was that promised savior, for she had brought the dragons back into the world. In truth, it seemed that together they had played their parts in preserving the realm, and the realm, finally exhausted by unending war, was inclined to accept both. Throughout that day and into the night, they toiled. By morning, the sky had cleared to a pale, frigid blue, and columns of smoke rose on the horizon as funeral pyres were lit for the fallen. Ned stood with Jon and Daenerys before the largest pyre, a black mountain of corpses topped by the bodies of beloved fighters from every corner of the land. Here lay men of the Night's Watch. Here lay northerners in their furs. Here lay Lannister foot soldiers who had arrived with Jaime under a white flag, Tyrell pikemen who'd come at Tyrion's urging, and even a handful of Ironborn, those who had pledged themselves to the cause despite Balon Greyjoy's defiance. Around the edges of the pyre were wildlings and Dothraki, having chosen to burn their dead apart from the Southerners' traditions, but all close enough that the ashes might mingle. It was a stark testament. They had died together, and they would be honored together. Daenerys set the first torch herself, stepping forward with shoulders squared. One of her dragons, Drogon, let out a low rumble, its molten eyes reflecting the firelight. The flames caught the kindling, leaping eagerly from one corpse to the next. Gradually, an inferno built, crackling into the silent winter air. The stench was nauseating, but no one turned away. They bore witness with bowed heads, offering silent prayers to the Seven, to the old gods, or to the Lord of Light, whatever gods they kept close to their hearts. It was only after the pyres had burned for hours that Jon and Daenerys withdrew to a makeshift command tent, joined by Ned, Tyrion Lannister, Lord Commander Mormont, and a few other key leaders. The dragons remained outside, watchful. Inside, the low glow of lanterns revealed haggard faces and eyes that had not known restful sleep in days. Daenerys sank into a simple wooden chair, arms limp at her sides. "We've won," she said, "or at least we've survived the Night King. But we have an entire realm to restore. The Iron Throne is still contested, even if many have pledged to follow us. Old wounds run deep." Tyrion, standing with hands folded before him, inclined his head. "Indeed, Your Grace. We must find ways to mend the fractures. The War of the Five Kings left scars from the Crownlands to the north, from the Reach to the Riverlands. Not to mention the Iron Islands and Dorne. Now, the threat of the others has receded, but that does not erase the politics of men." Stannis Baratheon, who had insisted on being present despite his own exhaustion, let out a pointed grunt. "The politics of men matter less than the rightful claim." The boy, he caught himself, glancing sidelong at Jon. "The king has the strongest claim. If we stand behind it, the lords of Westeros should fall in line." Ned spoke softly from where he stood near the tent's entrance. "Perhaps, Lord Stannis. But House Baratheon also has a claim, and Daenerys has a formidable following. There will be those who say that Rhaegar's line ended with the tragedy at the Trident, or that Daenerys's claim is the last living Targaryen claim. There will be some who believe the union of Jon and Daenerys is an abomination because they share blood, and others who will accept it as the Targaryen way. And there are still lords who resent the dragons, even after seeing them fight for us all." Jon rubbed at the stubble on his jaw, the tension in his shoulders visible. "And the North, father? The Northern lords swore me loyalty as king in the North, not as a Targaryen. Some of them are still uncomfortable with me taking up a Targaryen name. Will they accept the union that Daenerys and I are forging?" Ned hesitated, thinking of the stubborn pride of the great houses of the North. "They will, in time," he said. "They remember how you fought for them. They've seen the White Walkers. They know you never abandoned them. But you must walk a careful path. You are still part Stark, just as you are part Targaryen. That dual heritage might help heal the realm if handled wisely." Daenerys lifted her head, regarding Ned with a weary but grateful gaze. "I will honor the North's autonomy. The North has suffered greatly. If it requires some special status to remain at peace with the crown, we can discuss that. A measure of self-rule might be exactly the show of trust needed." Stannis pressed his lips together. "And where does that leave those who once declared themselves kings as well? The Ironborn and their wretched King Balon? Dorne, who always speak of independence? The Stormlands? Some will want to declare their own petty kingdoms. We cannot let this realm fracture anew." Tyrion's voice was measured, thoughtful. "We might propose a great council, though few truly trust those now, after the fiasco that saw Joffrey named heir under false pretenses. But perhaps a gathering of all great lords and ladies, overseen by the recognized monarchy, could settle these matters with an air of legitimacy. Once we have buy-in from the major houses, the rest should follow or face being pariahs. House Baratheon can be granted certain honors, especially if Lord Stannis remains a key figure in restoring order. House Lannister, well, that's complicated. My father is dead, my sister is, wherever she is. My brother Jaime has chosen to fight with us, though not all trust him. Still, if we can keep the Crownlands stable, the Tyrells might come to the table, and Dorne, though historically resentful, may see advantage in supporting a Targaryen monarchy if treated fairly." Daenerys managed a nod. We have to gather them. It will take weeks, perhaps months. But if the storms ease, ravens can fly. We'll invite every major house to come to King's Landing. The throne is still there, though battered and corrupted by Joffrey's reign. We'll proclaim a new era where the dragons are not the tyrants of old but protectors. We'll show them what unity can accomplish. Jon glanced at her, concern in his eyes. And the Golden Company, once rumored to be in Westeros, or in Essos at least? Tyrion shrugged. They were rumored to be in the pay of Euron Greyjoy for a time, or perhaps Cersei's. But their fortunes have likely shifted with the destruction unleashed by the White Walkers and the abrupt alliances formed. If they are still in play, we must treat them cautiously. Sellswords go where the gold is. But I suspect the reason they have not marched on us is that they saw the writing on the wall with the undead threat and realized there would be no gold to spend if the living lost. Stannis shifted impatiently. Very well, a council. But that is a matter for the coming weeks. For now, we must decide how to proceed from here. He looked at Jon and Daenerys as though forcibly reminding himself to show them respect. We should travel south, gather resources in Winterfell or even Moat Cailin, and then push to King's Landing. The roads will be harsh in winter, but we cannot linger in this graveyard. Ned silently agreed. They were perched too close to the haunted north, the edges of the Frost Fangs, the place where the Night King's army had clashed with them. It was time to see to the living who needed better shelter and supplies. That same evening, final instructions were given. The survivors, maesters, healers, soldiers would gather what they could, load it onto wagons, and begin the trek south. Winterfell would become a temporary seat of power, at least until they could confirm King's Landing was secure enough for Daenerys and Jon to arrive with dragons in tow. Ned walked through the camp in the twilight, the snow underfoot crunching with each step. Memories flooded him. The day he'd nearly lost his head in King's Landing, the day he returned to Winterfell from captivity, the moment he realized the White Walkers were more than old stories. He remembered the swirl of relief and terror upon telling Jon the truth of his parentage. Now Jon was recognized, at least by most who mattered, as a Targaryen king. Ned's heart felt heavier than any set of plate armor. Lyanna, he thought, I kept him safe. I kept my promise. And how the world has changed because of it. He stopped at one of the small tents where the wounded were being tended. Inside, he found Arya and Sansa, crouched at the bedside of a dying soldier from the Vale. Maester Wolkan had stepped outside, leaving them to say comforting words to him. Arya's face was set in quiet determination, and though Sansa's eyes brimmed with tears, she spoke softly to the man, holding his hand until his breath guttered out. When Ned entered, both daughters turned to look at him, and in that moment, he felt an overwhelming rush of pride. They had grown so much. Sansa, once so innocent and naive, now carried herself with grace and empathy tempered by suffering. Arya had become fierce and nimble, bearing scars both visible and hidden, forging her own path even as she tried to protect her family. His daughters were living reflections of the North's resilience. Sansa rose slowly, smoothed her skirts, and wiped at her eyes. Arya stood as well, crossing her arms as though trying to shield herself from the pain of what she had just witnessed. Ned stepped forward, resting a gentle hand on Arya's shoulder first, then Sansa's. We're leaving soon, he said quietly. We'll head south and then on to Winterfell. Are you both all right? Arya nodded. We're alive. That's more than many can say. Her voice sounded older than her years. I killed whites, father, she added, almost in a whisper as though seeking absolution. Men, women, whatever they once were. But they tried to kill our people, so I struck them down. Ned's stomach twisted. He remembered Arya as the little girl who once danced with Needle in the courtyard, who snuck around the Red Keep chasing cats. Now she had confronted terrors beyond imagination. You did what you had to, he said, voice thick. I'm sorry you had to see such horrors. Both of you. Sansa stepped closer, putting a hand on Arya's arm. We're all changed by this war, father. We can only hope that there's peace now, or some semblance of it. Ned closed his eyes. We will try. Jon and Daenerys wish to convene a great council. I think it might be the best hope for lasting peace. Once we're in Winterfell, will you help? The realm could use your voices. The lords trust you, especially after what you've endured at the hands of House Lannister. They'll want to hear from Starks who stayed strong. Arya looked uncertain, as though her mind was already wandering to other pursuits, vengeances left incomplete, or perhaps old ghosts she had yet to put to rest. But Sansa nodded, the steel in her spine evident. Of course, father. Whatever is needed to keep the peace. Ned lingered a few moments longer, silently thanking the gods that he still had his daughters, that they'd survived everything from King's Landing to the long night. When he finally stepped outside, the wind had eased and the night sky showed stars between torn clouds. Every breath felt both like a privilege and a burden, knowing that so many had not survived to see the dawn. By the time the column finally set forth the next morning, the pyres had burned down to ash. Nearly all the bodies had been dealt with, save for a few scattered remains that search parties continued to discover. Dragons soared overhead, occasionally landing to stretch or roar, an uneasy presence that sent horses skittish. The Dothraki, uneasy in the cold, looked forward to any promise of a milder climate farther south. The wildlings who had joined them debated whether to stay near the wall or to keep moving, for winter was bitter, and they had come south mostly to avoid the undead. Some parted ways to the foothills or deeper forests. Others followed Tormund Giantsbane's lead and rode with Jon, occasionally joking about how bizarre it was to ride behind a king crow, as Tormund sometimes called him. Jon bore it with resignation, used to the wildlings' blunt ways by now. The march was agonizingly slow, hindered by wagons carrying the wounded and the scorched remains of weapons. In certain places, the roads were choked with snowdrifts taller than a man. Daenerys sometimes used her dragons to clear the path, letting them breathe a measured burst of flame to melt or break down ice, though it left the air thick with steam and the ground churned to slush and mud. Still, they pressed on, day by day, forging a route south. Ned rode near the head of the column with Jon and Daenerys, occasionally dropping back to speak with the various lords or with Stannis, who scouted with a small group of his knights. Ghost, Jon's direwolf, padded through the snow, bright red eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. At night, they made camp as best they could, setting up watch posts to guard against any lingering wights or roving brigands. The realm might have united for one great battle, but highwaymen and desperate refugees still prowled. Ned heard talk of villages ravaged by the White Walkers' advance, entire hamlets fleeing south with nowhere to go. The aftermath of this war against the dead would be felt for years. On a particularly cold evening, Ned found him, self-warming his hands by a small fire. Arya and Bran were there, the latter having returned to them not long before the final battle. Bran was changed in ways that made Ned's heart ache, his eyes looked distant, as if gazing at some invisible tapestry of the world. But it was still good to have him back, to know that somehow the gods had spared him from the tragedies that befell too many of their kin. As Ned ruffled Bran's hair, he felt the boy stiffen. "Father," Bran said in that soft voice that seemed both childlike and ancient, "I saw you once, in a dream. You were kneeling before the weirwood tree in Winterfell's godwood, tears in your eyes. You asked the old gods for forgiveness." Ned swallowed hard. He remembered that day after he had returned from King's Landing with his life spared. He had knelt by the ancient heart tree, wrestling with guilt and relief. He whispered. "I asked for forgiveness for everything I'd done in the name of keeping secrets, for the sake of the realm." Bran's eyes were half-lidded, as if still half-lost in that dreamscape. "The old gods do not resent you, father. They know you did what you felt you must. The winter snows bury many truths only to melt away and reveal them again when spring comes. That is the nature of time." Arya shifted uncomfortably, as though Bran's cryptic words pricked at something she did not want to consider. Ned squeezed Bran's hand. "Thank you, son. I'm glad you're here with us." Then he fixed Arya with a gentle look. "And you, my wild one. Try to get some sleep. We have many miles ahead." Arya nodded, hugging her knees. "I still dream of them sometimes. The whites. The others. I dream they rise again." Ned forced a reassuring tone. "They won't. Not while we live. And if they do, we'll be ready." They continued like that for days, forging slowly through the brutal winter terrain. Scouts raced ahead, searching for safer paths. Whenever the dragons found clearings large enough, they would rest, huntsmen bringing them game, mainly deer or elk, though it hardly satisfied their ravenous appetites. Daenerys worried constantly over Rhaegal's wounded flank, and she took a risk once by having him roost near a hot spring they found in a hidden valley. The warm water seemed to help the dragon's healing, though the steam drew curious watchers. In the gloom of those nights, Ned overheard men marveling that dragons could be so vulnerable. He hoped it might remind all that even these mythical creatures needed care. Perhaps that would temper old hatreds that still smoldered over the Targaryens' historical conquest. At long last, the column crested a ridge and looked down upon the upper expanse of the Wolfswood. The trees stretched like a dark ocean of pine and fir, snow-laden branches drooping under the weight. This, Ned knew, marked the approach to Winterfell's domain. Beyond that forest lay the fortress itself, ancestral seat of House Stark, a place of warmth in winter thanks to the hot springs that fed its walls. He felt a surge of both relief and anxiety. When they'd left the castle, it had been to face an unholy war. Now they returned at the head of an alliance bristling with foreign warriors and war-scarred veterans. Could Winterfell hold them all? Would the lords of the north gather to greet them with open arms or with hidden doubts? He gazed over at Jon. The young man, king or prince or both, looked pensive, eyes sweeping the horizon as though uncertain how to proceed. By his side, Daenerys guided her horse carefully along the snowy trail, her breath coming in visible puffs. She must have been thinking similar thoughts. How would these Northmen receive her? She was Targaryen, descendant of the line that had once crushed and burned the North, but also the woman who had helped save their lives from the dead. The question hung in the crisp air, unspoken. Within another 2 days, they reached the outskirts of Winterfell. The outer hamlets and holdfasts had been alerted by ravens, so the locals were not entirely shocked by the arrival. Even so, the sight of dragons circling overhead caused many to quake with a mix of awe and terror. Some cried out in fear that King Aegon Targaryen had come to burn their homes. Others rushed forward with tears of gratitude upon hearing stories of how these same dragons had turned the tide in the Great War against the others. Children pressed themselves behind fences, peering wide-eyed at the Dothraki horses and the Unsullied's tall spears. Winterfell's gates opened to them, though not without a heavy sense of tension. They entered in a slow, deliberate procession, banners snapping in the wind. The direwolf of House Stark flew proudly alongside the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen, and the crowned stag of House Baratheon, Stannis's banner, flew behind them, along with an array of lesser houses from the north. People crowded the courtyard, curious and anxious. Some knelt when they saw Jon and Daenerys approach, others simply bowed their heads. But if there was any question about formalities, they were answered by the presence of Ned Stark. When the Lord of Winterfell stood by Jon's side and extended a formal welcome, the tension in the crowd eased. Some let out relieved cheers, others broke into hushed murmurs. The dragons were guided to rest in a space beyond the walls, near the hot springs, where they could remain warm and far from the crowded courtyard. Winterfell's great hall had never been so full, at least not in living memory. Men and women spilled into every corner, a mixture of northern lords, Baratheon knights, Targaryen supporters, wildling representatives, and more. The hall was warmed by the roaring fires in the stone hearths, though the mood was guarded. Into this space, Jon and Daenerys were led to seats at the high table, with Ned in a seat of honor beside them. Sansa, looking every bit a lady of House Stark, took her place as well, while Arya slipped in quietly, refusing any seat that would draw too much attention. Bran lingered at the edge, Hodder by his side. Though Hodder's part in the story had changed after so many travails, he still served as gentle companion and caretaker for Bran. Outside, the battered city of tents and huts stretched along Winterfell's outer walls, housing the bulk of their forces. Stannis and his retinue, along with many knights, would remain in the castle's guest quarters or in pavilions within the courtyard. The hustle and bustle was tremendous, and the castle's servants, as well as volunteers from the surrounding lands, toiled ceaselessly to provide food and lodging for so many. Ned knew that their stores would run thin, even with careful rationing. They had counted on the winter stores to survive a harsh season, not to feed half the realm's army. Yet that evening, in a show of hospitality meant to cement goodwill, a feast was held. The supplies might be short, but enough salt pork, dried fish, and root vegetables had been scraped together for a modest meal, supplemented by what the Dothraki and Unsullied could hunt or gather. Ale was passed around liberally, as was mead, to take the chill from weary bones. The mood was a strange mix: solemn relief at being alive, anxiety about the future, and a cautious sense that perhaps real peace was within reach. Jon stood at the front of the hall, a wooden cup in hand. Silence fell as he surveyed the gathered faces. "We have all come a long way," he said, voice carrying across the hush. "We've fought together against an enemy that wanted to end all life. Many died, and for them we must mourn. But we must also honor them by building something better than the broken realm we had before. I stand here not as a southern king looking to subdue the north, but as a man of the north myself, yet also Targaryen by blood. I ask all of you for unity in the days to come. War may not be over in every corner of Westeros, but if we can show the lords and ladies of the 7 kingdoms that we stand together, perhaps we can stop the wheel from spinning on and on, crushing the innocent beneath it. Daenerys rose, placing a hand on Jon's shoulder. I was once a girl with no home, exiled across the narrow sea. I saw what cruelty could do to the world, but I have also seen how hope can ignite like a spark in the darkness. My dragons were born from the ashes of tragedy, yet they fought for all of us just as you fought for me. I do not come to conquer, but to ensure that children do not grow up terrified of the night. We vow to protect the realm as best we can, to be better rulers than the mad king my father ever was or the other tyrants who caused this land to bleed. A subdued rumble of applause rippled through the hall, the Northmen more reserved than jubilant. Still, Ned could sense a reluctant acceptance blossoming in many hearts. They had seen what these two had accomplished. They remembered the nightmares of the long night. If this alliance promised stability, perhaps it was worth supporting. As the feast continued, Ned slipped away. He found himself wandering the familiar corridors, lit by flickering torches that painted the old stone walls in dancing shadows. His feet carried him toward the godwood as they often did when he needed peace. The air was sharp, but the heart tree stood as it always had, bark bone white, leaves red as blood, face carved with solemn eyes that seemed older than time. Snow dusted the branches and steam rose from the hot springs that trickled through the godwood, lending an ethereal mist to the quiet grove. He knelt by the tree, pressing one hand to its trunk. Emotions he had tried to bury rose unbidden. Relief, grief, pride, longing. Lyanna, he whispered, feeling foolish for speaking her name aloud to the empty air. But the old gods listened, or so he believed. I kept my promise. Jon is safe. He's more than safe, he's the realm's new hope, it seems. I pray I've done the right thing by telling him the truth and letting that truth guide us. The realm is in his hands now. Perhaps that's where it was always meant to be. He closed his eyes, inhaling the mingled scent of snow and warm water. A faint crunch of footsteps alerted him, and he turned to see Catelyn standing at the edge of the clearing, her cloak drawn tight. She wore a solemn expression, her breath pluming in the chill. He rose, offering a faint smile. They had come far since the days of her resentment toward Jon Snow. The boy she believed was Ned's bastard. Now she knew the truth, and though it did not erase the years of hurt, she had grown to accept it. He's something, isn't he? She said softly, walking closer. Your sister's child. I watch him sometimes, trying to see Rhaegar in his face, trying to see Lyanna in his eyes. But all I see is Jon, and I think that's enough. Ned nodded. He reminds me so much of her. Fierce, determined, yet kind. Rhaegar, well, I didn't truly know him, but he was said to be honorable in his own way. A dreamer. Perhaps that's what fueled him, an idealism that cost him his life. Catelyn sighed, slipping her hand into Ned's. Let's hope Jon's idealism brings about something better than tragedy. Daenerys is impressive, but I see the wariness in the Northern Lord's eyes. They remember the old Targaryen kings, the burnings, the sense of subjugation. This union may not come easily. We'll guide them, Ned said firmly. We'll show them that she's no tyrant and that Jon is no stranger to the north. They'll come around. She studied him. And you, Eddard Stark, what will you do? Are you content to stand aside, letting the realm hail Jon as king, after all you endured in King's Landing, after your father and brother were murdered by the Mad King? He lowered his head. I never wanted a throne. I wanted only to protect my family. If allowing Jon to take his rightful place helps protect them all, helps keep the realm from descending into endless war, that is enough for me. Her lips curved into a hint of a sad smile. It's always been enough. You never sought glory. But you deserve peace, Ned. We all do. He kissed her brow, then turned his gaze back to the old gods. The heart tree watched with inscrutable eyes. For a moment he let himself believe they could find that peace. A shaky peace, perhaps, but peace nonetheless. Over the next days, Winterfell bustled with activity. Messages flew by raven to every corner of the realm, invitations, summons, pleased to attend a great council in King's Landing where the new monarchy would be formally recognized. Maesters from various houses corresponded with one another, arranging routes through war-torn or snowbound areas. The Tyrells, so vital for the breadbasket of the Reach, were particularly courted. Daenerys needed their support to feed the armies and, in time, the people. Bravos and other free cities heard whispers that the Targaryens were in ascendance again, though their reaction was measured. The Iron Bank might see advantage in forging alliances, but they had never been known to offer generosity without guarantee of repayment. Mercenary companies in Essos awaited a sign that Westeros was stable enough for trade and profit again. Within Winterfell's walls, the tension between the different factions calmed under the daily routine of shared meals, joint patrols, and the simple reality that they all had survived the worst. Dothraki sang songs around campfires, some about the wondrous cold land beyond the poison water, others about the great battle they'd fought alongside dragons. Unsullied stoically carried out their duties, maintaining discipline that impressed even Stannis' soldierly eye. Wildlings roamed near the outskirts, sometimes venturing into the castle to share stories or trade furs. Meanwhile, northern lords trickled in from more distant corners, summoned to see this new king and queen for themselves. Lady Mormont, young Lyanna Mormont, arrived in a fury of indignation at having missed the great battle, though she swiftly warmed to Daenerys when the queen spoke to her with respect. Some of the older lords, like Lord Glover, grumbled about Targaryens but showed courtesy to Ned and Sansa out of deference. Amid the swirl of visitors, one day brought an unexpected rider from the west, a hawk-faced man in the proud colors of House Arryn, accompanied by Knights of the Vale. Peter Baelish was among them, though not in any official capacity. He arrived wearing a modest traveling cloak, his cunning eyes flicking from face to face. Ned greeted him with a guarded wariness. The memory of Baelish's betrayal in King's Landing still stung. Yet it was Baelish who had, ironically, helped broker a partial peace that saved Ned from the headsman's sword in the first place. Likely because he saw an advantage in it. Ned could not shake the feeling that Baelish's every move was part of some larger, hidden game. Baelish bowed low to Jon and Daenerys in the great hall, an ingratiating smile on his lips. "Your Graces," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I come to pledge the Vale's support for your cause, as Lord Protector of the Vale." Lord Royce, standing behind Baelish, grimaced but did not contradict him. Baelish's grip on the Vale had only tightened after Lisa Arryn's death, and while young Robin Arryn was still nominally Lord of the Eyrie, Baelish pulled the strings. Jon eyed him with cool reserve. "We welcome the Vale's support, yet we must ensure that all who come do so in good faith. The realm needs unity, not more schemes." Baelish placed a hand over his heart. "But of course, I've learned the perils of cunning for cunning's sake, Your Grace. In these new times I see more value in genuine alliances. The White Walkers have taught us all how fragile life is. The Vale stands ready to meet whatever challenges remain." Ned said nothing. He watched Baelish carefully, wondering how many lies were woven into that polished speech. But with war and winter raging, perhaps even Baelish understood that the lines had shifted. The best he could do was cling to power by serving the new regime, or so Ned hoped. While the castle's corridors buzzed with politics, Sansa and Arya reconnected in small, stolen moments. One morning, Ned found them sparring in the courtyard, Sansa standing aside with a bored expression while Arya practiced with a wooden blade against a straw dummy. The crisp air carried Arya's sharp exhalations as she lunged and pivoted, the near-silent feat of a well-trained water dancer. Sansa's hands were folded inside a fur-lined muff, her red hair braided. They were as different as two sisters could be, yet they shared a bond that had been forged in adversity. Ned stepped up beside Sansa. "She's improved," he observed. Sansa let out a half-laugh. "She has. She claims she learned much in Bravos from a man who, well, she won't tell me much about him, but I suspect it was no ordinary swordsman. Father, do you think she'll ever be content just living in Winterfell? She seems so restless." Ned watched Arya strike the dummy's head clean off, sending straw scattering across the courtyard. She lowered her practice sword, her chest heaving with exertion, eyes distant. "I don't know," Ned admitted. "Arya has always had a wandering spirit. Perhaps she'll need to see more of the world when this is all settled. But for now, we can be grateful she's here, that we're all together." Sansa nodded, her expression wistful. "I hope that in time we can all find our place." A few yards away, Brienne of Tarth was instructing Podrick Payne in technique, with Tormund looking on, occasionally tossing out off-color compliments to Brienne. The clash of steel against steel had a surprisingly comforting rhythm. It reminded Ned that even though they had formed a fragile peace, the realm was still dangerous. He was glad these souls kept their swords sharp. Days turned to weeks, and the time came for Jon and Daenerys to depart for King's Landing, accompanied by the lords and knights who would attend the Great Council. The roads south had been scouted, and though the snows were thick, the main highways were passable. Many in the alliance had urged them to wait for spring, but there was no telling how long winter might last, and the realm needed direction sooner rather than later. So they marched, leaving a portion of their forces behind to hold Winterfell and defend the north from any new threats. Among those who stayed were certain wildling clans who had found a tentative home in the Gift, close to the wall but safe from the horrors beyond. Stannis lingered behind as well, stating he would come south in due time once he had settled old Stormland matters. Ned suspected that the proud Baratheon lord felt overshadowed by the Targaryen ascendants and needed to salvage some of his dignity. Ned traveled with Jon and Daenerys, as did Tyrion, Missandei, Grey Worm, Arya, and Sansa, plus a retinue of Northern Bannermen, Galbart Glover, young Lady Mormont, Lord Serwyn, and others. The dragons soared overhead for much of the journey, though they sometimes veered off to hunt or flew on ahead, circling back only when Daenerys called. The common folk who glimpsed their silhouettes in the sky might still shiver with fear, but more and more they saw them as symbols of the realm's new guardians. Occasionally, Daenerys allowed villagers to approach when Drogon or Rhaegal was calm, letting them see that these beasts, though mighty, were not mindless engines of destruction. When the caravan passed into the Riverlands, they encountered the ravages left by the War of the Five Kings. Whole fields lay fallow. Ruined villages dotted the horizon, abandoned or inhabited by a handful of desperate peasants living in broken huts. In some places, outriders from House Frey appeared only to vanish again before they could be approached. The Freys had fractured since the death of Walder Frey, who, rumor said, had been assassinated in a dark act of vengeance. Many of the banners that once flew at the twins were scattered. The crossing itself was rumored to be in disarray. Tyrion suggested they might not have to deal with the Freys at all, not in any official capacity, as they had lost so much power. Ned, remembering the Red Wedding and all the horror it caused, felt no sadness at their downfall. They encountered multiple refugee camps along the roads, men and women who had fled either the fighting or the threat of the White Walkers. Jon insisted on distributing as many provisions as they could spare, causing friction with some lords who wanted to maintain their own supplies. But Daenerys backed Jon's decision, stating that a queen who cannot feed her people does not deserve their loyalty. It was a small gesture, but it sowed seeds of goodwill. Eventually, they passed Harrenhal, that cursed fortress of melted towers and lingering ghosts. The squat black walls brooded under the winter sky, pockmarked and crumbling. They did not linger there. Harrenhal had never brought anyone luck. Only the crows perched on parapets, cawing into the wind. Further south, they crossed into the Crownlands, where Lannister banners were said to still hold sway, supported by the remnants of King Joffrey's regime. But the name Joffrey carried little weight now that it was known he was a product of incest and that he had died at the wedding feast some time ago, the victim of poison. Tommen, the gentle boy, had also perished in the chaos that followed. Cersei Lannister's whereabouts were uncertain. Some said she had fled into exile, others that she was in hiding in the city. Jaime Lannister, for his part, had marched north to fight the undead, forging a fragile respect among those in the alliance. Now rumor claimed he was on his way back to King's Landing with a small escort, hoping to greet them. At long last, they beheld the city on the horizon, a mass of walls, spires, and red-tiled roofs, overshadowed by the massive bulk of the Red Keep perched on Aegon's high hill. The waters of Blackwater Bay looked cold and gray under the pallid winter light. Much of King's Landing still showed scars from Stannis' ill-fated assault and the riots that had erupted in the aftermath. The smell, as always, was pungent, a mix of tanneries, fish markets, refuse, and the unwashed throngs who inhabited the city's cramped neighborhoods. Daenerys' expression was unreadable as she studied the walls of her ancestral seat. "This is it," she murmured to Jon, who rode beside her. "The city my forefathers built, which they ruled and lost. I dreamed of it so many times, now I'm here under circumstances I never imagined." Jon squeezed her hand gently. "We face it together." Ned listened, letting their words sink in. He, too, had once come to King's Landing under circumstances he never imagined, as Robert Baratheon's new hand, believing in the possibility of honest governance only to have his life nearly taken by betrayal. Now he returned not as prisoner nor as hand, but as the father-uncle of the new king. He prayed it would not devour them all as it had so many before. A delegation awaited them outside the city gates, soldiers in Lannister crimson and gold standing stiffly. At their head, surprisingly, stood Jaime Lannister in polished armor, the sun glinting off the gilded lion upon his breastplate. His hair was shorter than before, lines of worry and wear etched into his features. Beside him was Bronn of the Blackwater, wearing a nonchalant grin, and a handful of city officials, each bowing hastily as Daenerys and Jon approached with their retinue. Jaime stepped forward. "Your Graces," he said, voice carefully respectful. He glanced at Ned. tension flickering in his green eyes. The two men had been on opposite sides for so long, but that had changed in the wars against the dead. Welcome to King's Landing. The city has been prepared to host the lords and ladies you've summoned. We've tried to restore order. Thank you, Sir Jaime, Daenerys answered, though her tone was measured. She had not forgotten that Jaime had been the one to kill her father, the Mad King, though that act had been both regicide and salvation in a sense. Has there been any trouble? Jaime nodded grimly. Some unrest in Flea Bottom, but nothing our men couldn't handle. The gold cloaks are at reduced strength after all the chaos in recent years, so we've augmented them with some of our own. As for the Red Keep, it's secure, though my sister is nowhere to be found. Ned studied Jaime's face. You haven't heard from her? She vanished some time after Tommen's death, Jaime said, tension in his jaw. I suspect she fled the capital. Varys's whispers say she might have headed west or across the sea, but no one truly knows. Tyrion, who had just ridden up, regarded Jaime with a complicated mix of sympathy and bitterness. Could be she ran off to Essos hoping to raise an army. Or maybe she's dead in a ditch somewhere. She made many enemies in her time. Jaime looked away, pain flashing in his eyes. He said nothing further about Cersei, only gestured for them to enter. The gates opened and the city's crowded streets lay beyond. People pressed against each other, craning to see the dragons overhead, to glimpse the rumored new Targaryen king, and to verify the presence of the Dragon Queen. A mixture of cheers and shouts rose from the throng. Some chanted "Dragon! Dragon!" Others called Jon's name, though half uncertain if they should call him Snow or Targaryen. The city guard kept order as best they could, forming ranks to clear a path. They wound their way up the main thoroughfare, passing the charred ruins where wildfire had once claimed many lives. The Red Keep, with its red stones and imposing towers, loomed closer. Finally, they entered the fortress grounds, crossing the moat and dismounting in the vast courtyard. Servants scurried forward, bowing low, offering to stable their horses. The retinue began to disperse, some heading to assigned quarters, others standing by to receive further instructions. Daenerys stood in the courtyard, gazing at the keep's high walls. This was my father's seat, she murmured, half to herself, half to Jon. And before him, generations of Targaryens. It feels strange. Like I'm walking through a memory that isn't mine. Jon took her hand. Whatever it was, we make it our own now. Then he turned to Ned, who dismounted stiffly. Father, or Uncle, he amended, a hint of a grin ghosting across his face. I hope you'll stay close. Your counsel is vital. Ned clasped Jon's shoulder. You know I will. Let's make sure your mother and father would be proud. The formalities were not completed in a single day, far from it. Over the next weeks, the great lords and ladies arrived in King's Landing in a steady trickle, braving winter roads to witness the momentous gathering. From the Reach came Lord Randall Tarly, though his face looked perpetually sour after hearing that his own son, Samwell, had played a part in the war against the others, forging alliances with wildlings and Targaryens. The Tyrells were represented by a cousin, for Mace Tyrell had died of illness and his daughter Marjorie had once been wed to Joffrey, her whereabouts uncertain in the chaos that followed. From Dorne arrived a delegation that included Illyria Sand's kin, though House Martell's lineage had been all but extinguished. They carried themselves with quiet pride, emphasizing that Dorne might accept a Targaryen queen if she respected their autonomy. The Iron Islands remained fractious. Yara Greyjoy eventually sailed into the harbor, having wrested control from her uncle Euron, who was rumored slain or in hiding. She made it clear the Ironborn desired a measure of independence, but also that she respected Jon for being the one who had apparently ended the long night. Each day, Ned sat in the hall or in private chambers, listening to the swirl of negotiations. On one occasion, he watched as Tyrion brokered a meeting with the Iron Bank's representatives, persuading them that Daenerys and Jon would not default on the crown's debts if given time to rebuild. On another, Sansa conferred with Tyrell envoys about restoring farmland in the Reach to feed the war-torn crownlands. The disputes were endless, the demands often conflicting, but slowly, methodically, a patchwork of agreements emerged. Amid all the talk of trade routes and titles, Ned found pockets of reflection. He recalled King Robert's carefree smiles in these halls, the nights of jousting and feasting, the illusions of safety that had cost them so dearly. He recalled the moment he'd confronted Cersei with the truth of her children's parentage, thinking it was the honorable thing to do, only to be repaid with betrayal. That memory stung less now that so much had changed, but it remained a cautionary lesson. In the Game of Thrones, honor alone was rarely enough. Yet here they were, forging a monarchy built, he hoped, on something nobler than ambition. Jon and Daenerys had proven themselves in the crucible of war. If any two people could bring something new to Westeros, it was they. The official Great Council took place in the Red Keep's throne room, which had been repaired after many battles but still showed the scars of conflict. The Iron Throne loomed at the far end, a twisted mass of swords hammered together long ago by Aegon the Conqueror's command. For generations, that seat had symbolized power and the corruption that power wrought. Now, the lords and ladies who entered the throne room seemed subdued, wary of the potential that it might all start again. Daenerys and Jon sat side by side on slightly elevated chairs, not the Iron Throne itself, which loomed just behind them as a symbol of monarchy. They had decided they would only ascend that monstrous seat together, and only after the council had recognized their rule. One by one, the representatives swore fealty or expressed their concerns. The lords of the Stormlands kneeling with reluctance but acknowledging Stannis' endorsement. The Vale, represented by Baelish and the child Lord Aeron, half-dazed but docile. The North, of course, led by Ned's bannermen. The Riverlands, battered but hopeful, petitioning for relief. Dorne demanded certain liberties, no subjugation by Dragonfire, no harsh taxes. Yara Greyjoy insisted the Iron Islands be allowed to choose their own lord and keep a portion of their independence. Tyrell cousins clamored for regency in the Reach until a suitable heir could be determined from among the surviving Tyrell line or a faithful vassal. It was a jigsaw of centuries of grudges and differing legal claims. Tyrion deftly managed the proceedings. Brienne, Podrick, and Grey Worm stood watch, ensuring the rules of safe conduct were obeyed. Missandei recorded each oath, her handwriting precise. Over the course of days, the dais where Jon and Daenerys sat became the focal point of a new order. Gradually, concessions were hammered out. The North would be granted a unique status, honoring their traditions, with Ned Stark as its warden and steward, while Jon, being half Stark, recognized the North's special place in the monarchy's heart. Dorne received a charter guaranteeing a measure of self-governance, the fruit of countless negotiations. The Iron Islands were promised that if they abided by the realm's broader laws, they could elect their own lord or lady, subject only to the crown's ultimate authority in times of national crisis. Ned took note that throughout, Jon's voice carried moral weight. When a petty dispute arose, the lords looked to him, recalling how he had saved the realm from an undead terror. Daenerys commanded a presence that kept them from defying that moral weight. Her dragons circled overhead, a reminder that even if their monarchy was gentler than those before, they were not toothless. It was a potent combination, mercy and strength in equal measure. At last, on the final day, the lords assembled for the formal coronation. Many had suggested it be performed in the Great September of Baelor, but the September had been destroyed in the explosion of wildfire. Reconstruction had barely begun. So instead, they gathered in the courtyard of the Red Keep under a crisp winter sky with stands built for onlookers and a dais for the royals. Snow drifted in lazy spirals, a stark contrast to the warmth of the torches lining the space. The Iron Throne had been moved temporarily to the dais, forming a dramatic backdrop. Gowned in black and crimson, Daenerys stood with regal poise. She wore a cloak lined with white fur and homage to the north, and on her breast was a stylized dragon brooch wrought in silver. Jon wore dark leathers trimmed with stark gray fur and a cloak pinned by a small dragon and wolf emblem symbolizing the unity of House Stark and House Targaryen. Ghost stood behind him, and Drogon perched on a high rampart, letting out the occasional rumbling growl that reverberated across the courtyard. The hush among the gathering was profound. Ned took his place near the front with Sansa, Arya, and Bran at his side. He glanced at them, feeling an ache of pride and wonder. So much had transpired since the day King Robert rode into Winterfell to ask Ned to be his hand. Now here they were, on the cusp of a new age. Varys, the master of whisperers who had once flitted through these halls, was nowhere to be seen, his fate unknown. Littlefinger lurked among the Vale retinue, face impassive. Tyrion stood near the dais, designated as the new hand of the king and queen. The sea of faces stretched back toward the Red Keep's walls, lords and ladies, knights and soldiers, smallfolk peering from behind. The moment felt electric. A hush fell as a high officer of the faith, a surviving septon from a lesser sept, stepped forward to recite prayers to the seven. The old gods were not neglected, for Ned had insisted that the new monarchy respect both traditions. This led to a curious melding of rites. The septon invoked the seven, then turned to a tall weirwood branch that had been set up and sanctified for the occasion. In the hush, the wind stirred, rustling the cloaks of the crowd. Daenerys bowed her head as the septon declared her lineage. Daenerys Stormborn of the House Targaryen, first of her name, queen of the Undulls and the Roiner and the first men, protector of the realm, the unburnt, mother of dragons. Then he turned to Jon, Aegon Targaryen, sixth of his name, born of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, king of the Undulls and the Roiner and the first men, protector of the realm. May the gods bless their rule, and may this day mark the dawn of a new era. Jon exchanged a look with Daenerys. Both appeared solemn, yet determined. Then the Septon lifted a simple band of Valyrian steel, studded with small rubies, placing it gently upon Daenerys's brow. Another band, wrought of black iron inlaid with silver, was placed on Jon's head. The two turned to face the crowd, crowned in the sight of gods and men, each standing as monarch in their own right, together. A roar of approval rose from many throats. Others applauded more reservedly, but none openly challenged them. The Targaryens were restored, tempered by Stark honor, bound by a cause greater than conquest. Ned found his eyes moist, remembering how the realm had bled for so long. Maybe, just maybe, the bleeding could stop. Jon raised a hand, calling for silence. His voice resonated across the courtyard. Lords and ladies of Westeros, we accept these crowns not as a right of tyranny, but as a duty to all who dwell in these lands. We pledge to protect and serve, to remember the lessons of the long night, to strive for justice even when it's not easy. We stand before you united by the blood of the dragon and the blood of the wolf. Let our reign bring peace if the gods will it. Daenerys added, we have seen how fragile life is. We have felt the sting of loss and the glory of triumph when we stand together. The realm is large enough for all of us. Northmen, Dornish, Ironborn, and everything in between. So let us cast aside the ghosts of old wars and reach for something new. As your queen, I will do all in my power to ensure that no child is burned by dragonfire needlessly. No people starve under neglect. No threat like the White Walkers catches us divided again. The applause came louder now, swelling into a thunderous crescendo. Drogon opened his jaws in a great roar that shook the stones, echoing across the city. Ned could not stop the tears that slipped down his cheeks. He let out a shaky breath, imagining Lyanna's spirit smiling at the sight of her son crowned in the seat that once had spelled doom for their family. And he thought of Robert, who had wanted to end every Targaryen but would have wept with relief to see the realm freed from the White Walkers. Perhaps even Robert could have found some measure of forgiveness here, seeing that not all Targaryens were shaped by madness. In the days that followed, a sense of guarded optimism blanketed King's Landing. Daenerys and Jon issued royal proclamations, establishing leniency for houses that had fought against them, provided they pledged fealty now, proclaiming that the Night's Watch be restructured and strengthened, with resources directed to maintain the wall and watch for any resurgence of the undead, promising to work with the Iron Bank to stabilize the economy. Tyrion, as the Hand, labored day and night, drafting edicts and forging alliances. Sansa Stark, recognized for her intelligence and diplomacy, was given an advisory role that placed her among the highest counselors. Arya remained something of a free spirit, but occasionally, she slipped into the meeting chambers, offering incisive remarks that startled many a lord. Bran mostly stayed in the Red Keep's quiet library, occasionally emerging to give strange bits of insight that hinted at his gifts. One late afternoon, Ned found himself walking through the Red Keep's gardens, escorted by a single guard. The winter chill was less oppressive this far south, but a faint frost coated the leaves. He paused by a lemon tree that clung to life, its fruits few and bitter. He heard footsteps and turned to see Jon approach, wearing a simple cloak over his royal attire. Ghost trailed behind him, sniffing the stones. "Walk with me, father?" Jon asked, his voice gentle. Ned smiled and nodded, dismissing the guard with a glance. They strolled past the withering rose bushes, taking in the faint slant of sun that broke through the clouds. "How are you holding up?" Ned asked quietly, noting the strain in Jon's posture. Jon exhaled. "It's not what I expected. Being king, people come to me with every grievance, from the price of bread to the question of whether we should send an envoy to the Summer Islands. Daenerys and I speak constantly, but there's so much that needs doing. I thought defeating the Night King was the hardest part, but rebuilding might be the real challenge." Ned squeezed Jon's shoulder. "Leading is never easy, especially in a realm so battered. But you have good people at your side. Tyrion has a head for details. Sansa has a gift for seeing through deceptions. Daenerys is beloved by many, and feared enough by others to keep them in line. And you have your own sense of duty and honor, which people trust. They stepped around a broken statue of some Targaryen ancestor, its face chipped away. The Red Keep had endured so many hands, each leaving scars. I worry, Jon said, frowning. Worry that I'm not Targaryen enough for some and too Targaryen for others. Worry about new threats. Euron Greyjoy may be dead, but Balon's ambitions could resurface. And what? Of Essos? The Golden Company? Pentos? Could they one day see us as weak and strike? Ned released a soft sigh. The world is never without threats. Even if you had no crown, you would face dangers. We can't live in fear of every shadow. The best you can do is fortify your alliances and treat your people well so that if a threat does come, the realm will unite again. Jon nodded, glancing at Ghost, who patted to his side and nuzzled his hand. He crouched to ruffle the direwolf's fur, and for a moment Ned saw the boy Jon had once been, earnest, longing for acceptance. I miss the wall sometimes, Jon admitted. It was simpler there, in a way. The land was cruel and cold, but your duty was straightforward, defend the realm. Here, I must defend the realm from hunger, from rival claims, from greed and envy from itself. Ned knelt beside him, placing a hand on Ghost's thick fur. Duty never ends, Jon. But you're not alone in it. It's why I'm here, why your siblings are here, why Daenerys stands beside you. Don't lose sight of that. Jon straightened, gazing into the middle distance where the city's rooftops spread out below. Thank you. Father, he murmured, the old habit still comfortable. I need to hear that. In the subsequent weeks, more progress was made. Decrees to rebuild the Great September, to restore farmland, to open trade. Daenerys and Jon personally visited the flea-bottom slums, distributing aid and hearing pleas. Skeptics whispered it was just a show, but many poor folk knelt weeping, never having seen a king or queen bother with their plight. Even the newly formed City Watch, under a commander appointed by Tyrion, showed signs of improvement in discipline. Ned spent time in council sessions, but he also took opportunities to teach younger knights swordsmanship or to show Arya and Bran the city's hidden corners. He felt a pang of nostalgia for the days when he and Robert had roamed these courtyards in their youth, before the rebellion, before the madness of war claimed them all. The realm would never be the same. Maybe that was for the best. On one mild afternoon, the small council convened in a solar with wide windows overlooking Blackwater Bay. Daenerys sat at the head of the table, Jon at her side. Tyrion was present, along with Sansa, Ned, Missandei, and a handful of key lords. They discussed trade agreements, the proposed arrangement with the Iron Bank, and the looming question of how to reconstitute the royal court. Titles had to be given out carefully. Jaime Lannister had refused any high position but remained in the city to atone in his own way. Bronn demanded a castle. He was politely reminded that such gifts would come only once the realm's stability was assured. Varys was still missing, though ravens sought him. Perhaps he was in Pentos or Lys, biding his time. Suddenly, a guard rushed in, eyes wide. Your Graces, a ship has arrived from the east. A Lyseni merchant vessel carrying an envoy who says he bears urgent tidings. Daenerys and Jon exchanged looks. Show them in, Daenerys said, curiosity piqued. Moments later, a slender man in exotic silks stepped into the room, flanked by armed sailors from Lys. He bowed deeply. My greetings, Your Graces. I am Ricardo Tazine, envoy of the Sea Lord of Lys. I come bearing news of unrest in the disputed lands and rumors that mercenary companies may be eyeing Westeros, the Golden Company among them. At the mention of the Golden Company, tension rippled through the council. That storied army of exiled knights and Sellswords had once been sworn to the Blackfire pretenders, Targaryen bastards who tried to claim the throne. In recent times, they had been rumored to ally with Euron or with Cersei. Now, who knew what they intended? Daenerys leaned forward, face calm but eyes hard. Go on. Ricardo dipped his head. They have heard rumors that the White Walkers are vanquished. They suspect your realm might be weak from war and ripe for a new conquest, or that pockets of rebellion might hire them against your rule. The Sea Lord suggests you reaffirm old ties with the free cities, so they know you are not as vulnerable as some believe. Ned felt his stomach tighten. Another war so soon would be disastrous. The realm was stretched to its limits. Jon's jaw clenched. We will not allow Sellswords to terrorize our people. If they try to land on our shores, we will meet them with steel and flame. Tyrion tapped his fingers on the table. We should send envoys of our own with gifts to show that we prefer peace. Let them see we are not the easy prey they believe. As for the Golden Company, perhaps we can buy their loyalty, or at least buy their neutrality. Daenerys frowned. I will not pay bribes to every Sellsword captain who thinks us weak. Jon placed a hand on hers. We might not have to. Remember, the Golden Company often claims a Targaryen heritage in their older lines. It might be enough to remind them that a true Targaryen reigns again. The debate continued, but the question lingered. Even after defeating the Night King, would Westeros face an endless parade of new threats? Such was the nature of power. In the wake of the envoy's visit, letters were dispatched to Essos. Daenerys considered sending a representative, perhaps Jorah Mormont, if ever he returned from his own quests, or Daario Naharis, who had remained in Meereen to keep the peace. But for now, the immediate concern was ensuring the realm's internal structure was solid. If the Golden Company or others tried to invade, at least Westeros would be more united than it had been in generations. Months passed. Winter's grip gradually loosened. In King's Landing, the snow turned to slush, then melted away under the southern sun, leaving muddy streets behind. Builders worked on repairs to the city walls and to the Red Keep. Markets reopened, though goods remained scarce. Daenerys and Jon visited from time to time the site of the old Great September, meeting with Septons about reconstructing a new center of worship that might also include spaces for the old gods, a bold experiment in religious tolerance. Ned watched these developments with cautious optimism. He saw in Jon a reluctant but earnest king, in Daenerys a passionate but learning queen. He saw his children stepping into roles they never asked for, Sansa as a keen political mind, Arya as a restless wanderer who sometimes served as a roving protector, Bran as a quiet enigma with knowledge beyond normal sight. The northern lords, mostly returned to their lands, respected Ned's presence at court, trusting he would look out for their interests. One bright morning, a raven arrived from the wall. Ned opened it with trembling hands, worried it might contain dire news. Instead, it bore word from the Night's Watch that spring might be closer than expected, the snows receding from the edges of the forest. Wildlings were adjusting to life south of the wall, and while occasional wights still lurked in hidden pockets, no great threat had arisen. The walkers remained shattered, the long night truly over. Ned took a stroll along the castle ramparts, letting the news buoy his spirits. Ghost accompanied him for a stretch, then trotted off to find Jon. High above, Regal circled lazily. He imagined he could see the glint of Daenerys's hair as she rode the dragon, surveying her capital. When he passed a group of guards, they nodded respectfully. There was no sense of intimidation in their posture, no fear that Ned Stark might be a traitor or a potential rival. The realm had changed that much. He paused at a vantage point overlooking Blackwater Bay. Ships dotted the water, some carrying the gold and grain from the Reach, others plying trades with bravos. The horizon was hazy with salt air. Once Ned had stood here bracing for a siege by Stannis. Now he looked out and saw possibility. A flutter of cloth behind him caused him to turn. It was Tyrion, stepping onto the rampart walk. The dwarf offered a polite dip of his head. "Lord Stark," he said, "I trust the day finds you in good health?" Ned nodded, folding his hands on the stone merlin. "As good as one can be in King's Landing, Lord Hand." Tyrion leaned beside him. "You know, sometimes I wonder if we actually succeeded in changing anything or if we just replaced one set of crowned heads with another. Then I look around at the orphans in Flea Bottom being fed, at the trade caravans rebuilding roads, at the realm not drowning in blood, and I dare to hope we've done some good." Ned offered a small smile. "If I've learned one thing, it's that illusions of permanence are just that, illusions. Any peace we have, we must nurture. It can be undone with a single betrayal. But I believe Jon and Daenerys are not the sort to betray the realm." Tyrion's voice was soft. "I hope you're right, and I suspect you are. They have been tested as few rulers ever are. If that can't shape them into something better, then perhaps nothing can." They stood in silence a while, the sea breeze tugging at their cloaks. Finally, Ned turned to go. "If you'll excuse me, Lord Hand, I have a letter to write to my wife. She remains in Winterfell, seeing to preparations for the spring planting. I've not spoken to her in too long." "Of course," Tyrion said. "Give her my regards." Ned descended the stairs. In the corridors, he passed gilded tapestries still marred by smoke stains from the battles that had rocked the Red Keep. He thought back to the day he arrived in King's Landing as Robert Baratheon's friend, the day he nearly lost his life to Joffrey's madness, the weeks he spent in a damp cell. So much heartbreak and strife. Yet here he was, alive, on the other side of cataclysmic wars and the father figure to a king who carried his sister's blood, crowned with the acceptance of a realm hungry for peace. He returned to his chambers, opened the shutters to let in the mild sunlight, and sat at a desk. Before him lay a blank parchment, the inkpot shimmering. He dipped the quill and paused, collecting his thoughts. Then he began to write. My dearest Catelyn, it has been some time since last we spoke, though the ravens fly often. Much has happened here. Jon and Daenerys have been crowned before the assembled lords of Westeros, forging alliances we never thought possible. Tensions remain, but each day we see small victories, fields being replanted, roads repaired, hope returning to the eyes of the small folk. I think of you often, of Winterfell, and pray that all is well. I long to walk again in the Godwood with you beside me, to see our children laugh among the ancient trees, free from the burdens of war. He continued to write, words flowing in a mix of gratitude and yearning. Through the open window came the sounds of the city, a hammer striking an anvil, laughter from children playing in a courtyard, the distant caw of gulls. It struck him that these were the sounds of life persisting in spite of all the tragedies that had come before. A new era had indeed dawned, shaped by the living who refused to yield to darkness. When he finished, he sealed the letter with the wolf's head sigil and set it aside to be sent by Raven. He rose and looked out over the city. The future was uncertain as ever. Old grudges would take time to fade, and new threats might arise from corners they did not expect. But if there was any chance for unity, for a realm not perpetually drenched in blood, it was here and now, with Jon and Daenerys guided by the lessons they had learned in the crucible of war. Ned Stark inhaled a slow, steady breath, remembering the promise he had made so long ago at his sister's bedside. He had kept Jon safe, and through that single thread they had woven a tapestry that might reshape Westeros for generations to come. He closed his eyes and murmured a silent prayer to the old gods and the new alike, offering thanks for the gift of life, for the gift of seeing this day when the rightful heir wore the crown, and for the hope that at last the realm might know peace. A dawn that banished the longest night. If his life had served no other purpose, he thought with a soft smile, at least he had lived to see this dream take shape, a dream in which the unlikeliest of heirs carried the realm's future upon his shoulders and carried it with honor, tempered by the memory and love of House Stark.